In a British residence in 2017, a horrific altercation took place. Law enforcement officers responding to a call discovered two young men, the apartment owner and his visitor. One of them had become so violent that the other required immediate hospitalization. The homeowner was in a dire condition. He had bruises and lacerations all over his face, with suspected concussion and internal bleeding. Medical professionals feared he might not survive, yet the young man regained consciousness and was even able to answer police questions. Both medical staff and law enforcement officials believed he was the victim. The injured party tried his best to maintain this narrative. That is, until officers examined his mobile phone. The images and footage they found there left them stunned. It became apparent that the individual sitting before them in such a pitiful state was not a victim at all. He was, in fact, one of the most prolific offenders in British history. Reynhard Maruli Tuas Sinaga was born on February 19, 1983. He grew up in Jambi, Indonesia, living with his parents and three younger siblings. The young man was born into an incredibly wealthy family. His father was a highly successful real estate entrepreneur and banker, owning one of Indonesia's largest banks and possessing his own palm oil plantation. The Sinaga family resided in a vast mansion, maintained by numerous staff. Little Reynhard merely had to snap his fingers to obtain anything he desired. A childhood in an affluent household, where every wish was fulfilled on demand, allowed him to feel exceptional, undoubtedly influencing his future life. Reynhard's parents were conservative Catholics who attended church weekly as a family. Reynhard grew up as a sensitive boy who played musical instruments, enjoyed reading, and often kept to himself. He was described as a reserved, shy child who never got into trouble, preferring to immerse himself in books and spend time alone rather than seeking out friendships. Reynhard attended a private elementary school and exhibited a sharp mind and good memory. The boy studied diligently and consistently ranked top of his class, yet lacked popularity at school and occasionally faced attacks from other students due to his effeminate mannerisms. Moreover, he was a big fan of the Spice Girls, which also led to teasing from the boys. After graduating high school in 2001, Reynhard enrolled in the country's leading public institution, the University of Indonesia, where he studied architecture. Here, the young man made numerous friends. He gained popularity, standing out with his vibrant appearance and sociability. He could get along with absolutely anyone. During his college years, Reynhard became the complete opposite of his high school self. In 2006, after earning his degree, Reynhard decided to continue his education abroad. He chose the United States as his destination, where he enrolled in college. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. Of course, his parents fully funded his education, but shortly after arriving in the USA, Reynhard changed his mind about staying there. He informed his father that this educational institution wasn't right for him. His classmates did nothing but hang out and throw parties. The would-be student packed his belongings and returned to Indonesia. Despite the fact that tuition and accommodation in the USA were paid in advance, money meant nothing to him. After spending just a couple of weeks at an American college, Reynhard didn't want to remain in his home country. This time, he was drawn to the UK, specifically Manchester. It's here that the rest of today's story unfolds. Reynhard traveled to Britain on a student visa. In August 2007, he became a student at the prestigious University of Manchester, where he earned a master's degree in urban planning in 2009 and a master's degree in sociology in 2011. Immersing himself in the measured life of the English, Reynhard relaxed and began frequenting nightclubs, making new friends, and socializing extensively. It was during this period that he contemplated his intimate preferences, which differed from the majority. Reynhard felt that his body was more excited by young men than attractive women. He had suspected this before, imagining youths in his fantasies. He simply could never openly admit it while in his native country, because it wasn't approved of in Indonesia. Now in Manchester, the young man finally felt that for the first time, he could be himself and speak openly about it. He developed a tight-knit group of friends with similar interests. They went clubbing every evening and had fun. Reynhard was open and friendly, sociable and passionate about his studies. He simply enjoyed student life and felt happy. All this wasn't cheap, but Sinaga wasn't worried about money, which his parents generously provided. He liked studying, spending time carefree, because it seemed his parents' finances were limitless. He was a perpetual student, and apparently, this was how he planned to spend his near future. Why look for work if money for living regularly appeared in his account? In 2011, Reynhard turned 28. He finally moved out of student housing, found a small apartment in an area called Gay Village, and pondered what to do next. His new dwelling was located practically in the city center, very close to bars and nightclubs. His parents still paid for the apartment. The problem arose because Reynhard was in the UK on a student visa. His studies had ended, and he wasn't planning to look for work, so he faced deportation. To prevent this, in 2012, the young man enrolled in a postgraduate program at the University of Leeds, where he began writing a dissertation in the field of socio-economic geography. The dissertation topic was directly related to his intimate preferences and people of non-traditional orientation of South Asian origin living in Manchester. Reynhard continued living in his rented apartment, commuting to university, and writing his academic paper. However, it seems that during this time, Reynhard's personality began to change. People started noticing that he was incredibly narcissistic and selfish, concerned only with himself. The perpetual student constantly wrote about himself on social media, portraying himself as almost a celebrity. He lost all his friends and settled for those he met in nightclubs. To gain favor and remain the center of attention, Reynhard made numerous casual acquaintances. He treated acquaintances to drinks and food, but didn't truly know any of them well. Reynhard always wore designer clothes, boasting about his bank account balance. When people questioned the source of his money, he lied about working for Manchester United and Manchester City football clubs. The young man said this to impress people. Reynhard was completely immersed in his personal life, having several relationships where he showed himself to be an obsessive possessor. When a romance ended, he would frighten his partners by threatening self-harm. Left alone, he simply sat on dating apps and spent much time on social media. During his prolonged student life, Reynhard practically forgot about his family. He remembered his parents only when he ran out of funds. He called his father and mother and even traveled to Indonesia to replenish his bank cards. The rest of the time, they didn't exist for him. Each time he returned to visit his family, he looked different, changed his hairstyle, wardrobe, and some habits. His parents and siblings considered him somewhat strange because they didn't know his main secret. Reynhard still hadn't told his family about his romantic interests. Each visit home ended with talks about the future. His mother and father very much wanted their eldest son to return to Indonesia, to get a job in the family business, find a wife, settle down, and have children. Reynhard's mother was very insistent on this and essentially threatened to stop financing his education in Britain. But the young man found words to convince his mother of the necessity of his stay in Manchester. However, this threat didn't pass without leaving a mark. Because Reynhard had to hide his true nature from his parents, he began to experience psychological discomfort. At the end of 2014, Reynhard had just returned from one of his trips to Indonesia, where he went to see his family and replenish his finances. At this point, he had turned 31. He had been studying for over 10 years. The young man, leading an active personal life, didn't attract attention from those around him. There were no warning signs indicating that something was happening in his head. It just happened in one moment, as if a trigger had been pulled. Everything that occurred was premeditated. Reynhard deliberately planned an attack on another man. On New Year's Eve 2015, a 22-year-old man was celebrating with friends in Manchester. They moved from club to club. At some point shortly before midnight, he approached the bar and ordered a drink, after which he couldn't remember anything. This happened because Reynhard slipped something into his cocktail, brought him to his apartment, and took advantage of him while he was unconscious. The 22-year-old guy woke up the next day on the floor of Reynhard's apartment in a puddle of his own vomit. He had no idea how he got there. The last thing that came to his mind was ordering a drink at the bar the night before. Seeing the apartment owner, the young man asked what had happened. Reynhard told him a made-up story about how the young man was too drunk the previous night and could barely stand. Reynhard, being a good guy, seeing his vulnerable state, offered him to lie down in his apartment since they were very close by. As soon as they went inside, the inebriated reveler fell to the floor and started snoring. The confused young man didn't even realize why his whole body hurt. He attributed it to the large amount of alcohol consumed, and was even glad that a good Samaritan had picked him up and not left him lying in that state on the street. The poor fellow began to apologize for the inconvenience, then gathered his things and left the apartment. In reality, Reynhard had taken advantage of the guy's helplessness twice, and it didn't even occur to him that he had become a victim of a crime. Thus, Reynhard carried out his plan, and he got away with it. However, he didn't keep quiet about it, but immediately sent a message to his WhatsApp friend group, boasting about what he had just done. Reynhard wrote that although he didn't get his New Year's kiss, he had his first intimacy in 2015. He shared that he met a straight guy at the bar near his home who was straight until they woke up naked. May 2015 be his initiation into another world. At that time, Reynhard's friends assumed everything had occurred by mutual consent. They didn't even realize Reynhard was simply bragging about his first successful offense. However, he himself experienced an incredible high from taking advantage of an unconscious guy, and this compelled him to plan his next assault. Just 4 weeks later, the same thing happened. This time, Reynhard encountered a 21-year-old man, also partying with friends at a nightclub in Manchester. The guy had drunk a bit too much when Reynhard persuaded him to come up to his apartment. There, he slipped him an illicit substance that rendered him unconscious, and had intercourse with him several times while he was out cold. Unexpectedly, this time the victim began to wake up and attempted to flee. His foggy mind and the apartment owner on top of him prevented him from doing so. The guy was still under the strong influence of tranquilizers and soon lost consciousness again. The next day, everything unfolded exactly as in the first case. The young man remembered absolutely nothing of what had transpired during the night. He apologized to the apartment owner and hurried to leave. At that time, Reynhard shared the apartment with an acquaintance. At some point, he had grown bored of living alone and invited a friend to stay. There was no close relationship between them. Most likely, the roommate didn't even suspect Reynhard's orientation. He heard him showing up in the middle of the night with some barely coherent strangers who disappeared by morning and never returned. When the roommate began to suspect something, Reynhard simply kicked him out, and now all the rooms were at his disposal. Nothing could hold him back anymore. From this point on, the frequency of attacks on young men increased. His third victim ended up in the apartment just a week later, not a month apart. And from that moment on, one or even several guys found themselves completely at Reynhard's mercy every week. Each of his attacks followed the same pattern. Reynhard would sit by the window of his downtown apartment, near which countless bars and nightclubs were located, and scout for potential victims. He could see Manchester's nightlife unfold before him. From the window, Reynhard observed people standing in line outside the nightclub entrance. He noticed young men who had drunk too much. Their gait was unsteady, and their movements were exaggerated. He also immediately singled out young guys who had separated from their groups. As soon as he spotted a suitable victim, he would leave his apartment and approach this person. Reynhard always struck up conversations with his potential lovers, playing the role of a good Samaritan, as if he actually cared about the person. "Are you okay? You look lost. You've had too much to drink. You need to come in and freshen up. Your phone is dead. You need a phone charger. Where are your friends? You can wait for a taxi at my nearby apartment. It's very cold outside. Come on." These innocent phrases usually mark the beginning of an attack. Reynhard simply chose the appropriate one for each tipsy guy. Some really needed a phone charger to contact friends or call a taxi. Others wanted water or something stronger. Still others were freezing in winter while waiting for a car. It was these individuals Reynhard approached. He was so charismatic and friendly that he didn't evoke any negative emotions. People easily agreed to go up to his apartment. Once an intoxicated young man was inside, the second phase of the attack began. All his victims had very similar profiles. 99% of them were of traditional orientation, which Reynhard liked to brag about to his friends. He said he allowed young men to know themselves from another side, and it's not impossible that they enjoyed it. However, Reynhard didn't tell his friends that all these guys were unconscious when he showed them another side of intimate relationships. Most of his victims were very young. The average age was 21, but the age range was from 17 to 36 years old. Many of them were students, which is unsurprising given the area he used for stalking and hunting. Among the victims were representatives of all social strata and professions. There were cooks, personal trainers, military personnel, and the unemployed. All the young men also had athletic, toned physiques and were attractive in appearance. Reynhard's apartment was usually messy, so guests felt at ease, taking him for an ordinary guy. Things, clothes, and many different bottles of alcohol were strewn everywhere. Reynhard would offer the victim to make themselves comfortable on the couch and rest a bit, relax. Then came the offer of a drink, and in 9 out of 10 cases, it was an alcoholic beverage. The guys gladly indulged in free drinks, not knowing that a substance that would deprive them of their will was dissolved in the glass. This is a colorless liquid, practically tasteless. It's really difficult to detect in a drink due to its slightly salty taste. The substance can be felt in water, but usually by that time the guys were so drunk that they were not in a state to notice its aftertaste. In fact, the substance has medical applications. It can treat narcolepsy. Some use it as a disinhibiting drug, causing feelings of euphoria, relaxation, drowsiness. The substance reduces inhibitions and starts working within 10 minutes. Certain doses can lead to a completely unconscious state, after which it can be very difficult or almost impossible to remember what happened in reality. The effect can last for hours, but the drug is eliminated from the body very quickly, making it impossible to detect the consequences of its use. This substance is fairly common, often used to intoxicate potential victims. It's very dangerous, and possessing even small amounts in the UK can result in real prison time. However, Reynhard somehow obtained a large quantity of this substance and used it on his unsuspecting guests. After the spiked drink began to take effect, Reynhard moved to the next part of his plan. First, he needed to ensure the drug had taken full effect. He would ask the young men many questions to test their cognitive abilities. From their responses, it was easy to notice how consciousness slowly faded and they could no longer formulate normal sentences. Reynhard typically asked personal questions, but without any ulterior motive, as if he was simply inquiring about their affairs out of politeness. Reynhard also loved to take trophies. He stole various personal belongings from his victims. This could be almost anything: ID cards, credit cards, clothing items, and so on. The specific item didn't matter to him. What was important was having a trophy, which he then stored in a box under his bed. During the conversation, guests would become increasingly drowsy and start to lose consciousness. At this time, Reynhard prepared 2 cameras. He placed one on his phone on the dresser to film the entire encounter from a distance, and held the second in his hand to capture close-up footage. Reynhard recorded the victim's face, unclothed body, and intimate areas to view again later. Some of these videos lasted for hours, which is how long the assaults continued. There was one recording that was 8 hours long, where the victim didn't regain consciousness, and Reynhard continued his violations in various ways during that entire time. He didn't rush, feeling his impunity. Usually everything unfolded according to the same scenario. All the assaults were very aggressive, with some victims becoming ill. Bodies reacted differently to the illicit substance or bleeding would begin, but even this didn't stop Reynhard. The entire process was recorded on video from multiple angles. He specifically arranged the lighting to capture every detail. Some young men briefly regained consciousness, trying to escape, but their disoriented state prevented them from breaking free. Others attempted to defend themselves, but their movements were weak and uncoordinated. Reynhard knew that while the drug was active, they were completely under his control. The next day, they couldn't remember anything, not understanding how they ended up in this man's apartment. Most apologized and hurried to leave, feeling awkward about their behavior. Others sensed something was wrong, but couldn't imagine the true nature of what had occurred. Some woke up unable to move due to the drug's effects. They were terrified, unaware that this wasn't the worst of what had happened that night. This lack of knowledge was the main reason Reynhard got away with his actions for so long. The men who ended up in the predator's apartment had different thoughts and memories, but they all ended with drinking at a stranger's house and blacking out. The next morning, the host would tell everyone the same story about how they had too much to drink and fell asleep. At this point, the man was very charming, always wearing a wide, friendly smile, so he didn't seem to pose any threat. Reynhard was believed. Even if slight suspicions arose later, no one ever went to the police, not wanting to talk about it and just wishing to forget that night, leave everything behind and move on. Reynhard Sinaga continued to target young men, and his victim count rose to 10, then 20, 30, up to 100. The true number of this individual's victims remains unknown to this day. Reynhard's pleasant appearance aided him in committing these crimes against other men. Despite being over 30, he looked very young, and many mistook him for a harmless student. With his pronounced charisma and impeccable manners, Reynhard effortlessly gained the trust and sympathy of new acquaintances. His short stature and slim build also didn't raise any concerns among tipsy guys. But sooner or later, this had to end. One day, a 21-year-old named Michael was partying in Manchester with his friends. Around 4 in the morning, the young man realized he had lost his friends in the crowd. He wanted to call, but saw his phone was dead. Stepping into a takeaway food shop, Michael asked if he could borrow a phone charger. When Reynhard appeared nearby and offered to charge the phone at his apartment, the young man thought it was a bit odd. Reynhard seemed completely sober, so Michael was puzzled about what he was doing at a takeaway shop at 4 in the morning. However, not sensing any threat from the stranger, he agreed to go to his place and revive his phone. He also declined the offer of a drink at the apartment. Reynhard found himself in an unfamiliar situation for the first time, as most people agreed to some kind of beverage or, at least, a glass of water. He became flustered, not knowing what to do, so he started talking nonsense. Reynhard told his guest that he must be tired and could sleep on the couch, but this behavior confused Michael even more. He took his half-charged phone and simply left the apartment, considering Reynhard strange. Michael had no idea he had just escaped from the most prolific offender in British history. And if it weren't for his inner intuition, he would have become another victim. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video, it's really important. The assaults on men persisted for 2 years, from 2015 to 2017. At night, Reynhard terrorized Manchester, while during the day he led a seemingly ordinary life. He was still enrolled as a graduate student, working on his doctoral dissertation. In 2016, his work faced criticism because Reynhard himself was the central focus. Essentially, he was writing his own story, and he had to completely revise the paper. For the perpetual student, this was just another excuse not to return to Indonesia. Reynhard remained incredibly active on social media, creating short videos for TikTok, and continued to chat in a WhatsApp group with his friends, boasting about his intimate conquests. He claimed he was saving guys from their annoying girlfriends. In 2017, Reynhard became incredibly brazen and ultimately a bit careless. More and more men started waking up at the most inopportune moments, but he was so exhilarated that he continued his attacks as if he no longer cared if someone remembered something afterward. At some point, his actions escalated to abduction. Reynhard stored numerous digital records of his crimes on external hard drives. Some remained on his phones, and he also enjoyed following his victims' lives on social media. In 2017, someone realized after an encounter with Reynhard that he had been subjected to a forced sexual act and went to the police to report it. However, due to the effects of the tranquilizers, this person couldn't even recall the address of the apartment where it all took place. Detectives attempted to investigate the crime, but they had no name, house number, or precise description of the attacker's identity. And although they managed to extract the perpetrator's DNA from the victim's body, as Reynhard didn't use contraceptives, no matches were found in the police database. Reynhard had never previously come to the attention of law enforcement, so his DNA wasn't on file. Then on June 1st, 2017, something unexpected occurred. An 18-year-old named Peter was celebrating successful graduation exams with friends. At school, he played for the local rugby team, so he had the athletic build that Reynhard favored. That evening, he was out with friends drinking at a nightclub located right next to Reynhard's apartment. At midnight, Peter had already drunk enough and was feeling tipsy. The loud music gave him a headache, so he went outside to get some air and freshen up. He walked into an alley and sat right on the curb to catch his breath. Reynhard, apparently observing from the window, was sitting next to Peter in the alley within minutes, talking about something. The stranger seemed quite friendly to the graduate. He talked about how he himself had finished school. A pleasant, friendly conversation ensued between them. About 10 minutes later, Reynhard perked up, as if he had gotten cold, and suggested continuing their chat in his apartment, since he lived very close by. Peter thought he would call his friends, and when they finished partying, they would simply pick him up from Reynhard's place. Once inside, the young man first went to the bathroom to wash up, and then when he returned, the apartment owner offered him a drink. Peter drank the clear liquid, somewhat reminiscent of vodka, without asking any questions, and within a few minutes, he began to feel severe dizziness and nausea. The young man couldn't focus properly. The room started spinning almost instantly. Peter had already taken out his phone to text his friends and mom, but then Reynhard took the mobile from his hands and suggested lying down a bit to rest. Peter, overcoming weakness, stood up and even began making his way to the front door. However, his strength left him, and he collapsed to the floor, falling into Reynhard's power. As with all previous times, Reynhard set up phones for filming, turned on bright lights, and began his terrible actions. He planned to take advantage of Peter multiple times throughout the night. 4 hours later, the young man woke up lying face down. He felt that his pants and underwear were pulled down to his ankles, and at that moment, someone was trying to penetrate him from behind. Instead of losing consciousness again, Peter's body filled with adrenaline. He pushed Reynhard away from himself while fully conscious and stood up. Reynhard was in shock. No victim had ever come to their senses so quickly before. He had no idea what to do, so he just ran out of the room. Meanwhile, Peter pulled up his pants. Still not fully understanding what had happened to him, he began grabbing his belongings. At this moment, the apartment owner ran back into the room and started shouting at the top of his lungs. He wanted to make noise so the neighbors would think an intruder had broken into his apartment. Then he lunged at Peter with all his might, headbutting him in the stomach and knocking him to the floor. It finally dawned on the young man. that he had just been attacked with the intent to end his life. He gathered his remaining strength and began throwing punches. A serious fight broke out between the apartment owner and the guest. Reynhard bit, kicked, and scratched. However, several fairly strong blows, considering his condition, helped Peter throw off his attacker. This gave the young man a chance to escape. Peter frantically began grabbing his things, including his mobile phone. And just as he reached the front door, Reynhard suddenly emerged from somewhere to the side. At that moment, Reynhard fully understood that if he let the guy escape, he would immediately run to the police. Then all his activities would be exposed. He couldn't let Peter go, clinging to him like a hungry dog to a piece of meat. Peter sensed the seriousness of his opponent's intentions and became genuinely frightened. Being a rugby player, he had a sturdier build than the thin and short Reynhard. The athlete easily knocked down the scrawny Reynhard and started punching with all his might. Adrenaline was surging, and the blows came in a flurry. Peter swung his fists until the apartment owner lost consciousness, after which the young man left the dwelling through the front door, taking his belongings and phone. His first thought was to call his mom to come pick him up, and then try to forget about everything. But Peter realized that in such a state, he could easily have taken someone's life. So the youth began knocking on neighbors' doors for them to call emergency services, as his phone was completely drained. Emergency responders arrived on the scene very quickly. They found Peter, covered in blood, standing in the corridor of the apartment building. The young man directed a medic to Reynhard's apartment and reported that this person had drugged him with some substances, violated him, so he had to defend himself. When medics discovered Reynhard on the floor, he was still unconscious and looked very bad. The man was lying in a pool of his own blood. The police, arriving shortly after, immediately arrested Peter for assault. Obviously comparing how the victim and the attacker looked, they took the apartment owner for the injured party. As a result, Reynhard was taken to the hospital, fearing for his life, while Peter was taken to the police station. Fully convinced of their correctness, the police didn't even conduct any tests or examinations. They saw the body of the victim lying unconscious, and the muscular built body of the rugby player, and couldn't possibly admit that Peter was actually the victim in this situation. They simply put him in a cell and left him there for 11 hours. The poor guy sat behind bars wondering if he would be charged with assaulting Reynhard, whether he would survive. Meanwhile, Reynhard was in the hospital in critical condition, and doctors were worried he might not pull through. He was suspected of having a concussion and internal bleeding. However, after a few hours, Reynhard regained consciousness and told a nurse that he had been attacked right in his own apartment and subjected to forced sexual intercourse. The entire hospital staff treated him with sympathy. Nurses pitied the handsome young man who was battered all over. Later, police officers came to ask questions about the assault. The first thing the victim requested was his mobile phone. He claimed he wanted to contact his family and let them know he was okay. Reynhard hoped to delete incriminating video files from the phone, but as soon as the gadget was in the investigators' hands, they took it for examination, suspecting there might be some evidence of the attack. This was just a formality, since Peter accused Reynhard of abuse, but the police were obligated to check the device for any clues. The detectives even apologized to Reynhard that they had to act according to protocol. When asked to provide the unlock code, Reynhard began giving incorrect numbers. When the password was wrong yet again, law enforcement officers began to suspect something, and when the victim lunged at an officer, trying to snatch his phone, they realized he was trying to conceal some information. When access to the mobile was finally obtained and detectives opened the saved files, they were shocked. There was a video where Peter lay unconscious while Reynhard was engaging in sexual acts with him. That's when everything fell into place. Peter was immediately released from custody, and Reynhard was arrested. However, as is known, the revelations didn't end there. At that point, the police thought Reynhard had attacked Peter. They didn't even suspect that in their hands was a criminal who had committed a total of about 200 assaults on young men. When Peter was released, all his belongings were returned, and only now did the young man realize that in his haste he had grabbed the wrong phone. It was the apartment owner's mobile, and on it, the police found even more evidence of other crimes committed by Reynhard. Officers couldn't believe their eyes when they came across hundreds of photos and videos where Reynhard was assaulting dozens of different men. A search of the apartment revealed even more secrets of the quiet Indonesian guy. Hard drives storing over 800 different assault videos from the past 2.5 years, thousands of photographs, a box with victims' trophies, and more. They also discovered that Reynhard had been tracking victims on social media. In total, 195 people who had been in Reynhard's apartment were identified from the photographs. In reality, this number could be even higher. The suspect himself refused to give any comments on this matter, so he remained in custody, awaiting trial. The most difficult task for the police turned out to be informing the assault victims. Most men didn't even realize they had been subjected to coercion by a random stranger. Others, upon learning about it, went into complete denial. Unsurprisingly, few young men wanted to publicize what had happened to them. Many even refused to look at photos where they were under Reynhard's control. Almost all victims suffered severe psychological trauma after learning what Reynhard had done to them. Some quit their jobs or studies, tried to numb their pain with alcohol and illegal substances, fell into depression, and some even attempted to take their own lives. A year later, in June 2018, the trial began. The scale of this case was unprecedented in the United Kingdom. The court proceedings were divided into several parts and lasted 2 years in total. Only 48 young men agreed to testify against Reynhard. The others completely withdrew into themselves and refused to take any part in the investigative actions. Jurors in all trials had to watch each video in its entirety to see with their own eyes that all victims were unconscious during the attack, as Reynhard's lawyer claimed that this was nothing more than consensual erotic play. In January 2020, Reynhard Sinaga was convicted on 159 counts, including 136 cases of sexual assault against 48 victims. He received 88 life sentences as punishment, with the right to petition for parole after serving 30 years. Usually in the UK, such a sentence was only given to criminals who had taken multiple lives. In December 2020, the Court of Appeal extended Reynhard's initial minimum sentence from 30 years to 40, after the Attorney General's office stated that it was an unjustifiably lenient sentence. Reynhard's mother, who came from Indonesia, was in complete denial. The woman couldn't believe how her gentle, sweet son could have offended so many healthy, strong men with his actions. She hoped until the very end that some terrible mistake had occurred. This case is still not finished and remains the largest investigation in British history involving such a high number of victims. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon. How might one celebrate their 15th birthday if they reside in a tiny rural town? Naturally, by embarking on a camping trip with friends and having a great time around a campfire surrounded by nature. That's exactly what two pals, Nichole Collins and Lorraine Barry, decided to do. However, this outing turned into one of the most dreadful incidents in Australia's criminal history. In today's account, we'll travel back over 26 years to late 1997 in Bega, a town situated in the southeastern part of New South Wales, Australia. This small, secure, and welcoming community of just over 4,000 residents was home to two close friends, Lorraine Barry and Nichole Collins. Nichole Emma Collins was born on November 14, 1980, to Graham and Delma Collins in Bega. She spent her entire life there. Nichole's childhood was typical of most rural kids. Like her peers, She played tag in the pastures, snuck off to swim, and spent considerable time outdoors. Her father worked as a veterinarian, while her mother was a nurse. By 16, Nichole had also found employment. She worked part-time at a local grocery store. However, this was merely a modest income for her personal expenses. In reality, Nichole aspired to become either a chiropractor or work in interior design. Given the disparity between these fields, it's likely she hadn't given much serious thought to her future yet, enjoying life under her parents' protection. Nichole adored horseback riding. She even owned a horse that she cherished. Almost every weekend, the girl would go out for a ride with one of her friends. Nichole had numerous friends. She could easily approach a stranger and strike up a conversation, and within minutes, they'd be chatting like old acquaintances. People loved Nichole because she could always offer encouragement and find the right words in any situation. Thus, teenagers were drawn to her, subconsciously sensing that her energy was enough for everyone. One of Nichole's best friends, Sarah, recounted how nervous and anxious she felt when first arriving at a new school where her parents had transferred her because she had been mocked and bullied at her previous high school. She knew no one here and feared her classmates might subject her to similar harassment, but that didn't happen. Sarah's sense of dread vanished when Nichole, noticing the new girl sitting alone, approached and struck up a conversation with her. Subsequently, the girls became best friends, all thanks to Nichole's sociability. Sarah also met and befriended Lorraine Barry, another close friend of Nichole's. Lorraine Margaret Barry was born on October 11, 1982. She was slightly younger than Nichole, who had already turned 16 at that time. Lorraine was just days away from her 15th birthday when this horrific incident occurred. Lorraine's father, Garrett, worked for the local town council, while her mother, Cheryl, was a homemaker. Lorraine had an older brother named Nathan, who was about 17, and they had been incredibly close since childhood. Of course, like any teenagers, they had their quarrels and disagreements. As the elder sibling, Nathan was responsible for Lorraine, so sometimes he had to be strict with her. But overall, they got along wonderfully. Due to Lorraine's shy nature, her brother had to ensure that no one took advantage of her. Unlike the outgoing Nichole Collins, Lorraine preferred spending time at home in tranquility with her parents and brother. Very kind, generous, and modest, she was a great animal lover and dreamed of a future working with them. The two best friends with such different personalities complemented each other well. Lorraine gradually emerged from her shell, while Nichole became more calm and composed. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. The autumn break had begun. Lorraine's 15th birthday was approaching. The girls dreamed of celebrating this occasion in a special way. After coordinating with other classmates, they all set off on a camping trip together. They decided to pitch their tent camp in an area called White Rock, located just a few miles from Bega. Nichole's father, Graham, helped the teenagers set up tents, and both girls' parents would occasionally check in to ensure everything was all right. The trip began on October 3, 1997. The group of vacationing students enjoyed the warm weather. They swam, sunbathed, prepared simple meals over the fire, and just chatted around the campfire. Lorraine's older brother, Nathan, also camped there with his friends. Leaving the girls alone in the woods, even if close to home, was still not entirely safe. During the trip, the friends would sometimes run to Nichole's nearby house to shower and change clothes. 2 days after the start of their impromptu journey, on the evening of October 5, 1997, the group of campers, including the two friends, sat around the fire as usual. It was noticeable that Nichole was upset about something. The girl actually felt a bit down that evening because she had recently broken up with her boyfriend. Nichole wanted to get back together, and now, under the cover of darkness, she felt a burning desire to go and tell her boyfriend about it. Perhaps Nichole was experiencing such feelings for the first time. At 16, relationships with boys seem like the most important thing in life, and the breakup was very painful for both parties. Nichole was further angered by the thought that her ex-boyfriend was supposed to be at a party in the town of Gellet in New South Wales, which was about 3 miles from the camp that evening. Imagining that while Nichole sat here in the woods, some high school girl might be charming her boyfriend. The girl stood up resolutely and intended to walk there to sort things out once and for all. She wasn't scared by the prospect of walking for several hours. At that moment, she could only think about her boyfriend and their separation. Lorraine Barry, seeing how nervous Nichole was, went along with her to offer support if needed. The girls took a flashlight and left the camp after 9 p.m. They were familiar with the area, so they definitely couldn't get lost. Nevertheless, by morning, the friends hadn't returned to the campsite, and as it turned out, they never made it to the party. The girls simply vanished. Lorraine's older brother Nathan woke up at the campsite and first went to check on his sister. Not finding her in the tent, he assumed Lorraine and Nichole had spent the night at home, so he returned home and asked his mom and dad if they had seen the girls. Lorraine's parents were surprised, as their daughter was supposed to be at the camp under her older brother's supervision. They still hoped the girls had gone to Nichole's house and stayed there overnight, but worry began to slowly creep in. A call to Nichole's parents only intensified their concern, as the friends weren't there either. After this, the Barrys started calling all of their daughter's friends and classmates, but the only information they received was that the girls had set off on foot to a party in Gellet, leaving the camp the previous evening and not returning. Family and friends drove to all the places where young people usually hung out, but Lorraine and Nichole hadn't shown up there either, and since they never made it to the party, something must have happened to them on the way. Maybe they were injured or lost, or something much more sinister had occurred. Around noon on October 6th, having taken all possible independent steps, the Collins family and the Barry family decided to contact the police and report their daughters missing. From this point, the investigation into the disappearance of the 2 schoolgirls began. The theory that the teenagers had run away from home was immediately rejected, as the girls had left in the clothes they were wearing. All the camping gear remained fully in the camp. They only had a flashlight and a bottle of light alcoholic drink with them. Usually, if teenagers planned to roam freely without parental supervision, they would pack things that might be useful on the journey in advance, save money, and sneak away secretly. But there was no activity on the schoolgirls' bank accounts, and they would have needed money for food, transportation, and accommodation in any case. In addition to this, their families informed the police that neither of the girls was prone to running away, and they were allowed to spend time without adults because both were responsible. Their parents checked on them daily, and the older brother was also with them. The only thing Nathan didn't see was when they left for the party. So the search for the missing teenagers began very quickly, and it was concentrated in the area where the tent camp was located, and even in the direction of Gellet. Several police officers were assigned to investigate the case. A K-9 unit was called in, helicopters scanned the area from above, and countless volunteers combed through bushes and ravines. Information about this case spread very quickly across all news outlets. The police appealed to the public to report any findings in the area, resulting in numerous reports indicating that the girls had been seen in various places, ranging from a neighboring town to Melbourne and Sydney. All leads, unfortunately, led nowhere. Only in the afternoon, when the girls were declared missing, did a member of the public living near the campsite find women's clothing lying on the roadside. The road was just a mile from the camp. These were a flannel shirt and a sweater. As soon as they were handed over to the police, it was established that they belonged to Lorraine Barry. This was the clothing the schoolgirl was wearing on the night she and Nichole disappeared. By that time, the girls had been missing for only a few hours, and it was decided to return the clothing to Lorraine's parents. No forensic examination was conducted because at that point, the police still didn't suspect that a real crime had occurred. They were still hoping to find the girls alive. 4 days after the schoolgirl's disappearance, on October 9th, Lorraine's and Nichole's parents held a heart-wrenching press conference where they appealed to the public for information. They begged anyone who could help them find the girls. Nichole's father, Graham, was convinced that his daughter and her best friend had been kidnapped and forcibly taken away. And for parents, the most terrifying thing is knowing their child is in danger. The man even addressed the presumed kidnapper, urging him to show humanity and release the girls. It was after this appeal that a local resident came to the police and reported that on the night of the disappearance, she was driving on a dirt road near the campsite. It was around 9:50 p.m. The woman had to stop her car because another vehicle was standing right in the middle of the road. There was no way to drive around it without hitting it. The resident noticed that behind this car stood a man talking to 2 young girls. The vehicle blocking the road immediately moved to the shoulder. This meant that someone was also sitting in the driver's seat. Of course, at first, the woman didn't pay much attention to this encounter and just continued driving. But now, hearing the girls' parents' appeal on TV, she became fully convinced that those were Nichole Collins and Lorraine Barry. Was that also the man they were talking to? Could these people be somehow involved in the schoolgirl's disappearance? Considering that after this, neither Nichole nor Lorraine was seen by anyone else, it's quite likely that they were indeed taken somewhere. In addition to this report, the police received another lead in the investigation, which, oddly enough, involved a pink television. It's unknown whether this was somehow related to the schoolgirls, but the witness decided to report his find to law enforcement just in case, as he discovered it not far from the campsite. In the morning, while going about his business, the driver noticed something bright in the grass on the roadside. Driving closer, he realized it was a TV. The item looked normal from the outside, and the screen was intact, though covered in road dust. Deciding that the TV could be put to better use than lying in the open air, the man picked it up and took it to a refugee assistance center. From there, it ended up in someone's home, where it was repainted black and then sold for use to a local hotel. Whether this pink TV had any connection to the girl's disappearance was unclear at first, and initially, the detectives didn't take this lead too seriously. For them, it was just one strange incident in a long series of others they received daily. Only later, when the kidnapping theory seemed most credible, did the assumption arise that the TV might have belonged to one of the potential kidnappers. It was thrown out to free up the back seat in the car in which the schoolgirls were taken away. Perhaps this theory was far-fetched, but since no other concrete clues were coming in, investigators were forced to construct the most fantastic hypotheses. Several days passed, and still nothing was heard from the girls. Hope of finding them alive faded with each passing day. The rescue teams that searched the forest around the camp and roadside ditches found nothing. No signs of the schoolgirls. And after a few weeks, the police were forced to scale back the extensive search. The case wasn't closed. Detectives continued to check all possible hypotheses, but felt they were going in circles. Fortunately, investigators soon achieved a huge breakthrough in the case when a police informant provided the names of 2 men who, in his opinion, could be involved in the teenagers' abduction. First, both of these individuals had an incredibly long list of convictions, having committed countless various crimes, including several very violent ones. Secondly, these 2 men oddly commented on a newspaper article about the missing Nichole and Lorraine. Their conversation on this topic was accidentally overheard by the police informant, when one stated to the other that the police would definitely pin everything on them. Thirdly, these people were in Bega at the time when the schoolgirls disappeared. The men in question were Leslie Camilleri and Lindsay Beckett. At the time of this incident, Leslie was 28 years old and Lindsay was 23. Lindsay Hani Beckett was born on March 27, 1974, in New Zealand. In his teens, his family moved to Australia. According to Lindsay's reports, He never knew his biological father because he was conceived as a result of a crime. His mother was only 15 years old when she was attacked by a perpetrator and subjected to abuse. The result of this attack was an unwanted pregnancy. From childhood, Lindsay experienced the lack of love from his mother and other family members, so at a fairly young age, he himself began to show aggression and break the law. Lindsay began committing crimes such as theft, car theft, assaults, and drunken fights. Then he entered into a relationship with a woman named Laura Lee, who bore him 3 children. Later, the woman complained about how incredibly cruel Lindsay was towards her. He insulted her daily, both morally and physically. He used her body like some kind of object. As a result, over 3 years of their relationship, they had 3 children, one after another. At the same time, Lindsay Beckett was a person with a very low level of intelligence and easily influenced by others. This is exactly what happened when Leslie crossed his path. Leslie Alfred Camilleri was born on May 31, 1969, into a family with 6 children. He was from Liverpool, New South Wales. Like Lindsay, Leslie's father was virtually absent from his life for 13 years. As a child, Leslie was considered unmanageable. He very quickly lost control of himself and became aggressive. His parents couldn't handle him, and the boy spent most of his time in a juvenile detention center. He escaped from the institution and lived as a street child from 10 to 12 years old until the police returned him. At 15, after leaving the center for troubled teens, Leslie also began committing crimes. By 28, he had 146 convictions to his name. And the wildest thing is that this person was still freely walking the streets. Just a couple of weeks before Nichole and Lorraine disappeared, Leslie again appeared in court on charges of abusing his stepdaughter, who was only 11 years old. However, due to some legal technicalities, the trial was postponed, and Leslie was released on bail. Lindsay Beckett and Leslie Camilleri both resided in a town called Yass in New South Wales, situated a few hours' drive from Bega. They met while moving in the same criminal circles and jointly stealing cars. Leslie enjoyed keeping Lindsay under his influence. Leslie was only 5 years older, but could easily make Lindsay do anything due to his simple-mindedness. Lindsay even felt somewhat intimidated by Leslie. Just 2 weeks before Lorraine and Nichole vanished, these 2 men abducted a 19-year-old girl in Canberra, Australia's capital. They subjected her to a horrific assault in the back seat of their vehicle, threatening her with a knife. The captive managed to escape only through deception. She asked to use the restroom, and as soon as she exited the car, she ran as fast as she could, fleeing for her life. Lindsay and Leslie chased after her, but fortunately, she was able to hide in some bushes and wasn't found. The girl reported this attack to the police, but later, imagining having to go through a trial and relive everything, she withdrew her complaint. The thought of the assault was too traumatizing, and she wished to forget it like a terrible nightmare. This meant the criminals remained free, and they got away with it. So, Lindsay Beckett and Leslie Camilleri came to the detective's attention after a police informant expressed suspicions about them. Examining both men's criminal history, investigators indeed concluded that these could be the ones they were looking for. Officers were eager to question them quickly to gather information about the girls. Lindsay Beckett was arrested in Canberra while attempting to steal a car. Upon learning this, detectives investigating Nichole and Lorraine's case headed straight to the capital to meet with the suspect. This was on November 5, 1997, exactly a month after the girls disappeared. During the interrogation, Lindsay acted relaxed and detached. He denied any involvement in the teenager's disappearance, but when asked about the pink television, his body betrayed nervousness. He involuntarily tensed up. Although the man remained reticent, his previous calmness had vanished completely. Officers asked Lindsay if he had ever had a pink TV in his car. By then, they already knew that the accomplices had obtained this television from a second-hand store as part of some deal. The store owner confirmed this. This way, they managed to link the two suspects to a location near the camp where Nichole and Lorraine were last seen. After questioning Lindsay, the police spoke with Leslie Camilleri, who was also easy to find since he had been arrested and was in custody for violating bail conditions for another crime. Like Lindsay, he completely denied any involvement in the girls' case. Leslie even concocted an incredible story that he and Lindsay were in a different area that night, far from the camp where the teenagers were vacationing. But when the question about the pink television came up, Leslie's behavior changed entirely. He fell silent and didn't utter another word. Upon returning to his prison cell, he had a wild outburst. Leslie began sobbing and banging his head against the wall, repeating one phrase, "They know about the TV." He was so upset by his slip-up that the guards had to administer a sedative. Leslie experienced a genuine nervous breakdown. The detectives bet that Lindsay would crack first, considering he was easily influenced. For their next interrogation on November 12th, they brought along a 4-sized photographs of Lorraine and Nichole. The officers simply placed them on the table right in front of Lindsay, so he could see the girls' faces. As soon as he glanced at the teenagers' pictures, he immediately flipped them over, not wanting to look at them. Lindsay was visibly uncomfortable. The detectives told the arrestee that he had a chance to tell the truth about what happened to the girls because they were going to offer the same opportunity to Leslie, and if he confessed first, it would help him in court. Lindsay had a chance to make things easier for himself. After this conversation, Lindsay went outside with the guards to have a cigarette and make a decision. During this time, the man began to cry. He realized this was the end. There was no point in trying to deny his involvement anymore. Lindsay returned to the interrogation room and asked for a map. He was going to show the police where they could find the bodies of 16-year-old Nichole Collins and 14-year-old Lorraine Barry, who had been missing for over a month by that time. Lindsay traced his finger along the map, following the Monaro Highway, until he finally reached an area called Fiddler's Green Creek, located south of the Victoria state border with New South Wales. Lindsay said that's where the girls could be found because he had taken both their lives, and then he recounted what happened on that terrible night. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video, it's really important. On the evening of October 5th, 1997, he and Leslie Camilleri were simply driving around the area in their white Ford sedan. They were drinking beer and simultaneously injecting each other with illicit substances. According to Lindsay, Leslie spotted the girls walking one behind the other on the road towards Gelée and stopped, offering them a ride. These were Nichole Collins and Lorraine Barry. Apparently, this interaction was seen by a witness who was driving her car and had to stop because the Ford blocked the road. At around 10 p.m., after a brief discussion, the schoolgirls willingly got into the car. A pink portable TV, which Leslie and Lindsay had previously taken from someone else in lieu of a drug-related debt, was removed from the back seat of the car and tossed onto the roadside to make room for the girls to sit. The men told the schoolgirls they were going to drink beer on the beach and invited them to join. The teenagers voluntarily climbed into their vehicle. Later, the schoolgirls' parents and most people who knew the girls doubted that Nichole and Lorraine would agree to get into a car with two older men who were strangers. Most likely, they were forced into the vehicle. After the girls were in the car, Leslie drove to the beach, where they parked for a while. The men continued drinking and chatting with the friends. Then one of the schoolgirls asked to be taken back to the camp so they could inform their friends, who were probably looking for them. Leslie agreed, and indeed turned the car towards the campsite. The men said they'd take the girls back, but of course they had no intention of doing so. The dirt road was far from ideal. Rocks, potholes, and deep ruts caused the car to bounce from side to side. Additionally, the driver was not in a completely sound state. When the car jolted over another rock, Leslie began to get angry and show aggression. And because the road was bad, the girls were deemed at fault. Leslie decided to take out his frustrations on them. He pulled out a knife and began threatening them. Lindsay liked how the friends trembled with fear. He also took out his knife. Lorraine and Nichole were absolutely terrified. They had no way to escape, as the rear doors of the car were locked. They couldn't be opened from the inside. The schoolgirls were trapped. At this point, Leslie turned the Ford around and drove in the opposite direction from the camp. All this time, the men continued to wave their knives and threaten. If the teenagers didn't shut up or tried to escape, they would catch them and cut them. The perpetrators sped down the highway until they reached the spot where Lorraine's sweater was later found. They pulled the friends from the car and abused them in turn. Afterwards, they forced them back into the vehicle and drove on. Throughout this time, the men continued using drugs. That night, the girls were taken to several different locations. Periodically, the men would stop and continue to torment the teenagers again and again. This went on for about 9 straight hours. For 9 hours, the schoolgirls remained captives of these monsters. At some point, Leslie and Lindsay switched places. Leslie dozed off in the passenger seat, while Lindsay headed south towards the Victorian border. When his accomplice woke up, he got angry at Lindsay and started berating him for going the wrong way. They turned around again. The final stop, around 8 o'clock the next morning, was at Fiddler's Green Creek. The men again forced the girls out of the car. They made them undress completely and go to the creek to wash away any evidence of the assaults. While the schoolgirls were rinsing off in the water, Leslie began telling Lindsay they couldn't let them return. The friends and their parents would immediately go to the police, and then he and Lindsay would be in trouble. The men decided they would simply get rid of Lorraine and Nichole. The girls were ordered to dress again, then gagged, told to lie face down on the ground, and had their wrists and ankles bound with strips of jeans the men had torn. After this, Leslie ordered his accomplice to finish off the captives. Lindsay protested, saying it wasn't fair, but eventually complied when Leslie threatened to stab him. Leslie returned to the car and waited there while Lindsay tied Nichole to a tree, then grabbed Lorraine and dragged her to the creek. He wanted to drown the girl by holding her head underwater, but despite being bound, Lorraine resisted, not wanting to die. For a moment, she even managed to knock down her captor, and he got his pants wet. This angered the man. He pulled out his knife and plunged it into Lorraine's neck, continuing to hold her face underwater. When the girl stopped moving, Lindsay headed straight for Nichole. The schoolgirl probably already knew what was about to happen to her. She couldn't see what had happened to Lorraine, but she had heard her screams, which then suddenly stopped. The man approached her from behind and, using the knife, slashed her throat. However, this injury didn't take Nichole's life, but only forced her to struggle. Then Lindsay struck her in the throat, depriving her of the ability to make any sounds, and then delivered another knife blow to the chest, where he thought her heart was. Nichole fell to the ground, but apparently was still alive and trying to crawl. Lindsay began kicking her in the head until her gaze became fixed. Lindsay returned to the car where Leslie was waiting, and they drove home to Yass, disposing of the evidence along the way. They tossed the knives into a lake, burned the blood-stained clothes and ropes used to bind the girls, then simply returned to their homes and normal lives, continuing as if they hadn't just stolen the futures of 2 teenage girls. Later, the men tried to clean their car to remove all evidence of the schoolgirls' presence, and apparently even returned to the campsite area a few days later to find the pink television. They felt it could lead the cops to them. By that time, a local resident had already picked up the TV and taken it to a refugee center. After Lindsay made his confession, he was taken to Fiddler's Green Creek, where he pointed out the specific location where he had left Nichole and Lorraine. After about 5 days of searching, their decomposing bodies were recovered and taken to the coroner's office. The Collins and Barry families were informed of the true horror their daughters endured on the last night of their lives. News of the girls' deaths spread like wildfire, and it was devastating not only for the town. The entire country was in shock. On November 19th, 1997, a memorial service was held in Littleton Gardens. Thousands of people came to express their grief and support for the families of the victims. This horrific crime shocked the nation and left everyone in a state of horror. Leslie Camilleri and Lindsay Beckett were arrested and charged with double kidnapping, assault, and murder. Since Lindsay had already given a confession when it came to trial, he pleaded guilty to taking the lives of both girls. In June 1998, he was sentenced to 2 life terms with a minimum of 35 years behind bars. Leslie Camilleri did the opposite. He didn't plead guilty to the charges and essentially shifted all responsibility onto his accomplice. According to him, they did indeed pick up the girls on the road and went to the beach with them. Leslie then claimed he was unconscious most of the night due to a large amount of alcohol and illegal substances consumed. He allegedly just slept in the car for most of the night and had no idea what Lindsay had done to Lorraine and Nichole. He personally didn't participate in the attacks and killings. Of course, no one believed this. Despite everything, he still stood trial. Leslie Camilleri's trial began in February 1999. Fortunately, the prosecution had evidence that this man was a liar, and he was indeed involved in what happened to the girls. Firstly, Lorraine's clothing found on the roadside, her jumper and flannel shirt, was taken to the lab for examination. Seminal fluid matching Leslie Camilleri's DNA was found on it. Secondly, witness testimonies were taken. One of them was a 19-year-old girl who had also been kidnapped and assaulted by Lindsay and Leslie just a couple of weeks before Lorraine and Nichole disappeared, and who managed to escape. The police were able to track her down, and although she had tried in every way to erase this episode from her life, she bravely agreed to testify and tell the court about her terrible ordeal, just to punish these monsters. The girl felt responsible, believing that if she hadn't withdrawn her complaint then, the schoolgirls would still be alive. The main prosecution witness was Lindsay Beckett himself. He testified against his accomplice Leslie, having made a deal with the police. This is why his sentence turned out to be much lighter than expected. He admitted that he physically took the schoolgirls' lives, but did so only under pressure from Leslie. Leslie's behavior during the trial was disgusting. He constantly yawned, as if he didn't care at all that he was being tried for the brutal assault and murder of 2 innocent teenagers. It's good that the jury was able to see how deceitful and heartless this man was. In April 1999, Leslie was found guilty of the deaths of 16-year-old Nichole Collins and 14-year-old Lorraine Barry, and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. After Lindsay was convicted, he tried several times to appeal his sentence, but all his attempts were unsuccessful. The entire community was outraged that villains with so many convictions had both been out on bail even before this horrible crime. People were so angered that they blamed the criminal justice system for the girls' deaths. They genuinely couldn't understand why monsters like Lindsay and Leslie could freely walk the streets after all the crimes they had committed earlier. Why were such people given a second chance, a third, a 10th, a 20th? Public outrage led to amendments to the Bail Act 1978 in New South Wales. But this isn't the end of the story, because in 2013, 16 years after the murders of Nichole Collins and Lorraine Barry, Leslie again stood trial. It was established that these 2 schoolgirls were not the first victims. Authorities were able to link him to the disappearance of a 13-year-old girl named Prue Bird. Prue lived in Melbourne. She went missing in 1992, 5 years before the incident with Lorraine and Nichole. Prue Bird was the granddaughter of an informant who reported on the gang responsible for the bombing of the Melbourne Police Headquarters in 1986. It was believed she was kidnapped and killed as revenge, and Leslie was the one who carried out this job. Surprisingly, while in prison, Leslie fully admitted his guilt in the murder of 13-year-old Prue Bird. Unfortunately, her body was never found. In addition to life imprisonment, Leslie received another 28 years, so now this man will spend the rest of his days in prison. Sadly, This won't bring the children back to their parents. The lives of two families were completely destroyed because two men decided to satisfy their base instincts, but didn't want to face the consequences. Home, family, a thriving career. These are things many individuals aspire to. One woman from California managed to attain precisely this. She put in considerable effort to transform the American dream into reality. However, everything shifted in an instant when she was caught off guard. For most people around the world, relocating to the United States in pursuit of a fresh start, whether seeking fame and fortune, fleeing economic hardships, or simply aiming to enhance life for themselves and their loved ones, is always a novel experience that transforms absolutely everything. Today's tale unfolded in California, but its roots trace back to an entirely different nation. Ildiko Krajnyak was born on June 8, 1969, in Miskolc, a city situated in northeastern Hungary, primarily renowned as a significant industrial hub. Ildiko is a Hungarian female name of Germanic origin, translating to battle or warrior. Ildiko grew up with her parents Laszlo and Juliana, and her brother Laszlo, named after their father. The young woman was always close to her family, but life in Central and Eastern Europe was challenging, particularly in the 70s. The country was undergoing economic and cultural policy reforms, and people's quality of life began to gradually improve. Around this time, Ildiko completed high school, then obtained her cosmetologist license in Hungary that same year and started working for herself. Choosing the cosmetology profession wasn't coincidental. She followed in her mother's footsteps, who had previously worked in the beauty industry as well. Ildiko was just 20 years old when she was already on the path to success. The young woman had honed not only the skills of a good practitioner, but also knew how to build her future career. She understood everything, including managing her own business. She also recognized the importance of continuous learning in her field. The development of cosmetology required new knowledge. Ildiko earned a certificate in medical aesthetics and a bachelor's degree. The changing political regime in Hungary presented more opportunities for young people. Previously, exploring anything beyond one's native country was merely a dream, but now it had become a reality. Ildiko possessed valuable professional skills and was a highly ambitious young woman. She knew she could work anywhere and achieve success everywhere. She wanted to take advantage of the newly opened possibilities and experience somewhere beyond her home country. In 1992, the 23-year-old woman gathered her courage and took a decisive leap into the unknown. She dreamed of venturing not just beyond Hungary, but beyond Europe. So, packing only essentials in a suitcase and taking a small amount of saved money, Ildiko set off for a country she had only seen on television screens, the United States, straight to sunny California. For her, this was somewhat of a culture shock, not to mention adjusting to the weather and a completely different way of life. It was thrilling and frightening simultaneously. Alone in a foreign land with unfamiliar customs and language, without a single close soul nearby. Ildiko faced considerable challenges. The first thing she needed to do was find a job that could sustain her in another country. Then she had to learn the language and secure decent housing. Ildiko wasn't afraid of work, so she accepted the first position available at a small beauty salon as an assistant. To officially work in California and provide cosmetology services, she needed to obtain a license specifically in America. Hard work and perseverance helped Ildiko not give up during difficult moments. Therefore, she relied solely on her own strength and decided to achieve professional career heights at all costs. Eventually, she became a leading cosmetologist at the spa center of the luxurious Marriott Hotel. Starting small, this young woman established herself as a sought-after specialist. She strived to serve clients in a way that would make them return specifically to her. Gradually building a client base around her, Ildiko established new social connections, created a new social circle, and worked extremely hard. Her caring, friendly nature attracted people like a magnet. And after 4 years in the United States, in 1996, Ildiko married a man named Roni Jovestil. The newlyweds adored each other. Everyone who knew this couple noted the incredible love and family warmth that reigned between them. By this time, Ildiko had convinced her cousin Eva Boni to come to the United States, and when Eva emigrated and also settled in California, their joy knew no bounds. The sisters called each other every day, visited each other, went shopping, and exercised together. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. By the time Ildiko turned 27, she had lost her father. Her brother and mother Juliana remained in Hungary. Laszlo had his own life and family, while the grief-stricken woman was left completely alone after her husband's death. The daughter didn't want her mom to spend her twilight years in solitude. She was eager to show how wonderful life could be near her in the United States. Juliana had developed some health issues, so everyone would feel more at ease if mom moved in with her daughter. This would bring greater peace of mind to all. It's much harder to be at a distance and worry about not being able to help. Ildiko assisted Juliana in preparing documents to emigrate from Hungary to the USA, and she was determined to make her mother happy. This way, the woman could watch her grandchildren grow up and enjoy the warm, loving family atmosphere that Ildiko remembered so well from her childhood. In 1998, Roni and Ildiko welcomed their son Keanu into the world. The woman loved the boy with all her heart, and there was nothing she wouldn't do for him. Peace and tranquility reigned in their family. After the baby's birth, Ildiko threw herself back into work with renewed energy. She wanted to give her child the very best. Work became her #1 priority. The woman built a loyal client base. People came to her not just for cosmetic procedures, but simply to chat, to recharge from this bright woman in every respect. Her sweet, charming nature and carefree sense of humor, combined with ambition, intellect, and work ethic, made her a highly sought-after cosmetologist. Her relationships with clients were so close that she was even invited to birthdays, children's parties, and weddings. All this helped Ildiko open her own spa salon in 2002. She named it Magyar Cosmetics, which translates to Hungarian cosmetics. It offered various aesthetic services, facials, eyelash extensions, massage, hair removal, and much more. The spa received a 5-star rating, all thanks to Ildiko herself and the reviews left by satisfied clients. When providing services, the woman strived to use only the highest quality products and the latest technologies, which couldn't help but reflect in the results. For many years, Ildiko honed her skills and was now deservedly considered one of the best cosmetologists in her area. The spa center was located in a commercial building in Aliso Viejo, Southern California. It's about 7 miles from Laguna Beach and approximately 50 miles southeast of Los Angeles. It was in Orange County, a quiet place to live compared to the noise and bustle of Los Angeles. Working in the beauty industry, where appearance is of utmost importance, Ildiko herself was a walking advertisement for her skills and high-quality services. She was stylish and always impeccably groomed, looking wonderful and much younger than her age. In 2003, she once again upgraded her qualifications and received an international certificate as a medical esthetician. She also trained others as an aesthetic educator and worked with luxury skincare companies. In 2005, Ildiko's family moved to a 2-story, 4-bedroom house with a total area of 186 square meters in a very nice area in Trabuco Canyon. Mom Juliana lived with them and helped raise her grandson until he was sent to a private school. Ildiko's responsibilities at work included not only serving clients, but as a manager, she needed to maintain the establishment's standards, stay at the forefront of her industry, and keep up with all developments and new technologies. Moreover, she had to be an effective marketer. Ildiko found her calling, having an innate ability to quickly connect with people, which led to her success in business. She always genuinely cared for her clients, and people returned to her. She was often compared to a hairstylist to whom one tells all their secrets, as she too knew how to keep confidences. Besides being a highly qualified professional, Ildiko was truly a remarkable woman and an excellent friend to all who knew and loved her. In mid-2016, Ildiko's son, Keanu, left to study at Washington State University. The woman was very proud that her son played the tuba and was a member of the college marching band. Like any mother, she considered her son the best. By 2018, she had to relocate her spa center after the building where she initially rented space was sold. Now, it was a corner unit on the lower level of a 2-story red brick commercial building, still located in Aliso Viejo, but slightly closer to Ildiko's home, just a 15-minute drive away. The complex housed several organizations, including a chiropractor, massage therapist, and other medical offices. Palm trees and well-maintained lawns lined the side of the building where the day spa was located. Ildiko's clients could enjoy the sunny view through the tinted windows of the salon. In March 2018, the spa owner flew to Portugal for a short vacation, and in April, her brother from Hungary came to the United States. They all gathered together and had a wonderful time in California. Then they went to Seattle to visit Kino and ended their time together with a party in Las Vegas. The siblings had a fantastic holiday, but it was time for everyone to return home. Juliana, Ildiko's mother, had begun to develop dementia. She couldn't be left unsupervised for long periods. It was very fortunate that her husband Roni helped care for the elderly woman when his wife was away on business. On May 5th, Ildiko flew to Hungary, but this time, it was a business trip. She was thrilled about the new high-tech facial treatments that would soon be available at her spa in California. She knew this would give her clients amazing results. And Ildiko couldn't wait to get back to California and start working. She missed not only her family, but also her clients. Then, on an ordinary day, Ildiko Krajnyak's beautiful world of beauty was brutally destroyed. On May 15, 2018, shortly after 1 p.m., 911 began receiving calls about a possible fire or even an explosion in the commercial building housing Ildiko's spa center. Emergency responders rushed to the scene. The building was smoldering, and gray, acrid smoke rose from inside what remained of the corner area facing the street. No one knew exactly what had happened, but witnesses heard an explosion that caused plumes of smoke and saw debris flying through the air. Witness speculations ranged from celebratory fireworks and gas leaks to an earthquake. But whatever occurred, the corner part of the building where Ildiko's spa was located was simply blown away. Broken glass, remnants of furniture and walls were scattered everywhere on the grass, and the building's structure was exposed with insulation wires and protruding metal rods. Small fires flared up here and there. The alarms of nearby cars that remained standing sounded in a piercing chorus. The once quiet area filled with chaos in just a few minutes. People from neighboring buildings rushed out onto the street and frantically tried to run to a safe distance. They didn't know if another explosion would follow the first. Some immediately turned on their mobile phone cameras and started filming the events. As soon as firefighters could clear the area, many other units arrived at the scene. Police, bomb squads, ambulances, and of course, the ubiquitous media. Across the street from the building where the devastated spa was located was a kindergarten. Parents who heard about the explosion immediately started calling the teachers to find out if their children were all right. General panic also began among relatives of those who, besides Ildiko, worked in this building. Several casualties were discovered almost at the center of the explosion. Paramedics and medical staff managed to get closer, and it became evident that not everyone had managed to evacuate in time. There were seriously injured people. The medics saw a horrific sight: severed human limbs and body parts, still smoldering outside and in the parking lot. Several people gathered around two injured women, a mother and daughter who were lying on the ground, and another victim who had inhaled smoke. The women were in the salon when the explosion thundered. They somehow managed to escape to safety through a huge hole in the brick wall. Despite serious burns and lacerations, they were both alive. The injured were taken to the nearest hospital where they underwent emergency surgeries. Emergency responders from the fire department and Orange County Sheriff's Department had no idea what caused the damage and whether anyone else was inside. They cautiously entered the building to figure out what was going on. The owner of the Ildiko Krajnyak spa center was nowhere to be seen. No one could say for sure where the woman was during the explosion, but clients who visited the salon in the morning hours saw her at work. And now a flood of messages poured into the woman's phone. Not only friends and loved ones who had heard about the fire were writing. All clients who learned about the explosion in the building were calling and sending messages. Unfortunately, no one received a response. Upon hearing this news, Roni, Ildiko's husband of 22 years, rushed to the scene, desperately trying to find out if his wife was in the building when the fire occurred. But investigators told him there was no specific information at this stage. A woman named Valerie Stone was at work when she heard this terrible news. She first thought of her boyfriend, Stephen Beal. Although he didn't work at Ildiko's medical center, he acted as one of the partners and helped invest in the company. Valerie breathed a sigh of relief when Stephen answered the phone. The woman told him about the explosion, and he was shocked by what she told him. Stephen wasted no time and frantically sent a message to Ildiko saying that something had exploded in her spa. The man tried to find out if she was all right, but like others, he received no response. Sometime later, it became known that one person died as a result of the explosion in Aliso Viejo. The body was literally torn into several parts. This person was the spa owner, 48-year-old Ildiko Krajnyak. The woman's death immediately became the center of intense attention as law enforcement officers worked tirelessly to unravel the circumstances surrounding her demise. People wondered if this was a tragic accident or something more sinister. One of the officers headed to the hospital where the injured mother and daughter were recovering after surgery. He wanted to learn from eyewitnesses what preceded the catastrophe. Meanwhile, a team of specialists was working at the scene. They were trying to determine the source of the explosion. With a huge area of debris that needed to be sorted through piece by piece, time was crucial because this hardly resembled an accident, judging by the extent of the damage. And if this was someone's planned action, the next explosion could occur anywhere. After the spa rooms were cleared, officers discovered the epicenter of the explosion, which was near the reception desk. The ceiling in this area had collapsed, and the floor in the room above it had sagged. Investigators retrieved various items from the ruins of the establishment, including a cell phone, loose wires, a 9-volt battery, and melted adhesive tape, all of which were severely damaged. Law enforcement immediately set up a command post and a special phone line for calls. One of those who needed to be urgently called was Stephen Beal, one of the co-owners and partners of Ildiko Krajnyak's spa. He was 59 years old and lived in Long Beach. Considering that the owner of the salon might have been the target of the bombing, it was possible that anyone connected to her or her business could be at risk. Police bomb specialists rushed to Stephen's house in Long Beach to prevent a possible attack and assess the risks. When the team arrived, they ordered Stephen to leave the house to a safe distance, as there were several delivery boxes on his porch. One of them could have been deadly, so explosive experts first inspected the packages. Fortunately, they only contained items ordered by the owner for home repairs. When Stephen was informed of the news of Ildiko's tragic death, he couldn't believe it. Stephen couldn't recall anyone who would want to harm this woman. She did everything with a smile, and he didn't understand who would need to take her life and destroy her business. In his opinion, it could only be the machinations of competitors. After this incident, all services were mobilized. The Orange County Sheriff's Department and Fire Department, paramedics, hazardous materials specialists, urban search and rescue teams, tactical bomb squads, arson investigators, and a joint hazard assessment team. All these specially trained people worked simultaneously to uncover the details of the incident and prevent further possible incidents. Based on the testimony of surviving witnesses, the mother and daughter who were inside the spa, the following information was gathered. On May 15, 2018, around 1 p.m., the women had already completed all planned procedures and were at the reception desk to pay. They were being attended to by the spa owner, Ildiko, herself. Between serving clients, she had to perform various tasks, and now she had a pile of mail and several packages in front of her. The mother and daughter were regular clients and, like Ildiko, had come from Hungary. While the mother was paying, the daughter went to get something to drink. At this time, Ildiko placed one of the boxes on the table in front of her and began to open it with a regular office knife. Suddenly, their eyes were blinded by an incredibly bright flash of hot light, followed by a loud bang. A huge wave of heat and pressure threw the witness backward, causing flames and black smoke. Glass shards from windows and doors shattered throughout the lower level of the building, and then everything plunged into darkness. According to both women, there was no one else in the salon besides them and Ildiko, although usually several specialists worked there at once. The daughter essentially had to dig her mother out from under the debris and drag her to safety. Unfortunately, one of the woman's eyes couldn't be saved due to a shard, but she was grateful to be alive, even though she was very close to the epicenter of the explosion. The only thing that neither of them could say was what happened to Ildiko after the flash. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video, it's really important. The investigation into the death of 48-year-old mother, wife, and business owner Ildiko Krajnyak increasingly leaned towards her being the target. She had only a few weeks left until her 49th birthday. The items used to make the device were brought from outside. It wasn't something already in the spa. Consequently, someone intentionally sent Ildiko a deadly package, delivering it personally without using postal services. However, at this point, detectives refrained from publicly disclosing this information. An FBI task force was immediately called in to assist the Orange County Sheriff's Department, which was handling the case, for a more thorough investigation of the cause of the catastrophe. Meanwhile, investigators continued to question Ildiko's family and friends, and they learned only one thing that wasn't immediately apparent. It turned out that the relationship between the spouses had long since transitioned from romantic to friendly. Although Ildiko and Roni continued to live together, they had long been like brother and sister. The husband and wife still loved each other, but it was no longer the passionate love that united the couple at the beginning. They realized that each was looking for something different in life. The couple still lived together, caring for each other. But for the past couple of years, Ildiko had been dating other men, and Roni knew about it. They didn't publicize their split, at least until they met someone they wanted to spend the rest of their days with. During this time, Ildiko had been in contact with at least 5 or 6 other men, and essentially any of them could have been somehow involved in the spa center bombing. One of Ildiko's friends, who had been at the salon on that ill-fated morning, said that Ildiko had shared her excitement about a new boyfriend she was dating from Sacramento. She mentioned that she wanted to establish a more serious relationship with him. And now detectives wondered if Roni could have reacted negatively to his wife's new romance. Soon they arrived at his residence with a search warrant. The police combed through the entire house from top to bottom, but failed to find anything incriminating. The man's behavior led authorities to believe he was genuinely distressed by the sudden passing of his son's mother, whom he deeply respected and cared for. Keanu himself learned of the tragedy after receiving an alarming message from one of Ildiko's friends, inquiring if his mom had returned from Hungary and if she was all right. As the young man was in another state, he had no idea that a tragedy had occurred and his mother was gone. Keanu did a quick internet search and discovered that the building housing the spa center had been bombed. He attempted to contact Ildiko, but there was no response. The youth frantically refreshed his internet search, then began calling hospitals in the area, but there was no information about his mom anywhere. When the FBI finally called to inform him that Ildiko had perished, Keanu's world seemed to stop. He couldn't breathe and simultaneously couldn't understand why he hadn't been told earlier. He tried to reach his father and grandmother, but their phones weren't answering. Keanu didn't yet know that at this time their family home was being searched and their devices had been temporarily confiscated. News channel vans filled the street near Ildiko's house, attempting to capture every detail of the search. During this difficult time for the family, they didn't allow Ranilo and Juliana to grieve peacefully. Reporters shamelessly invaded the family's privacy during such a traumatic period. Fortunately, Keanu, who was preparing for his college final exams, returned home to be with his loved ones. He bravely addressed the media, thanking everyone who cared for their help and support, and added that at this time, family and friends would like to mourn the mother, wife, daughter, and friend privately. Caring neighbors organized a fundraiser for the family, not only to cover the upcoming unexpected funeral expenses, but also to send Juliana, Ildiko's mother, back to Hungary to her son Laszlo, as the care for the ill elderly woman had essentially fallen on her son-in-law's shoulders. Ildiko's closest neighbors tied ribbons of her favorite orange color near their homes to honor her memory and express support for the family. Incidentally, Laszlo, the brother of the woman living in Hungary, also learned of his sister's passing from the media. It's the worst thing, to discover shocking news not through a personal phone call, but essentially from a television screen. At first, he couldn't believe what he saw and heard. It all seemed like a bad dream, as they had seen each other quite recently, and everything had been fine. The next step for detectives was to determine who Ildiko had been in contact with recently, track her movements, and identify anyone who might have wanted to harm her. They examined her social media accounts, phone records, and mobile phone, which was found in the spa not far from the explosion site. When investigators sought to speak with Stephen Bill, a co-owner of the spa, they inadvertently discovered this individual had an unusual hobby. He crafted rockets and fireworks. Stephen didn't conceal his interests and even allowed officers to obtain a warrant to search his property. In Stephen's garage, they uncovered equipment for rocket construction, chemical substances used as fuel and binding agents in fireworks, and 3 containers of black powder. It turned out Stephen had been making rockets for many years, a fact known to all who were close to him. When asked to explain how he met Ildiko and how he became a co-owner of the spa, despite having no background in the beauty industry, he shared the following story. He and Ildiko connected in the summer of 2016 through a dating app. At that time, her business was experiencing some issues, possibly due to having to close her spa as they were asked to vacate the rented space. The woman knew she would overcome the difficulties eventually, but she filed for bankruptcy in the meantime. Stephen was a widower then, passionate about acting and constructing rockets and fireworks. A passionate romance blossomed between them, lasting about a year. Stephen was glad to assist his partner in opening a new salon elsewhere. He signed the lease agreement and became listed as a co-owner. Although their romantic relationship ended, they remained good friends and continued their joint business venture, where he maintained an active role. Shortly before their breakup, Ildiko and Stephen took a trip to Portugal. It was there he stumbled upon messages from other men on his girlfriend's phone and realized she had fallen out of love and no longer wanted to be with him. Stephen was 10 years older than Ildiko and fully understood their paths would eventually diverge. They ultimately parted ways, and by April, he had started dating another woman. Stephen informed investigators that he previously worked as an executive consultant but had been disabled for several years due to a diagnosis of aphasia. This was caused by lead poisoning. It's a disorder that causes difficulties with speech and comprehension, potentially severely limiting a person's ability to communicate. After this, he kept a low profile and simply assisted Ildiko's business however he could. Despite mixed feelings about Stephen and a lack of evidence to detain him, police had to release him after questioning. Yes, he wasn't deeply upset by his partner's death, but he had already experienced the emotional pain and grief of suddenly losing a loved one once before in his life. His 29-year-old wife had passed away from pancreatitis back in 2008, so perhaps he had just learned to internalize his emotions. However, the items and substances found in Stephen's garage could certainly have been used to create destructive devices. So on May 16th, just a day after the explosion, he was arrested by the FBI. Although this arrest wasn't directly related to Ildiko, he was charged with possessing an unregistered destructive device, but 2 days later, the prosecution withdrew their complaint, and Stephen was released. During this time, detectives began investigating other men in Ildiko's life, while the forensics lab continued studying fragments of the deadly device. This was incredibly time-consuming. One thing was clear: the components could be ordered online, but only someone with deep knowledge in this field could assemble them correctly. Again, all thoughts converged on Stephen. Investigators decided to better examine Stephen's background to either completely rule him out or confirm their suspicions. Stephen Bill was born in 1959 in Long Beach, California. He earned a business degree in college, then married. His 29-year-old wife and mother of his 3 children, Christina, passed away in February 2008. The details of her death raised some suspicions among detectives. Christina and Stephen were renovating their home. One day, they were carrying a 22-kilogram table down the stairs. Christina was at the bottom, while Stephen was at the top. Suddenly, the couple somehow lost their balance. The woman fell and was pinned by the weight of the table at the foot of the stairs. Her husband fell from above, increasing the pressure with his mass. After this terrible accident, Christina was rushed to the hospital with severe hip and pelvic injuries. She remained in treatment for the next several weeks. She was discharged, but complications arose. Eventually, the young woman died in the intensive care unit. It turned out that her death wasn't simply from pancreatitis. The accident had triggered complications. Interestingly, when Christina died, the toxicology report indicated a very high and unexplained concentration of lead in her system. It was also discovered that just 6 weeks prior, Stephen had taken out an accidental death life insurance policy through his employer. Christina's autopsy report noted that death resulted from electrolyte imbalance due to pancreatitis and other undetermined factors. Despite all the oddities, Stephen wasn't charged with anything. Whether this was coincidence or something much more serious remained unclear. Then, police found surveillance camera footage showing Stephen Bill purchasing parts and chemicals later found in the deadly device. His motive became clear after conversations with Ildiko's friends. The woman had repeatedly expressed concerns about Stephen. Although they had broken up, he was unwilling to let go and interfered with her personal life in various ways. It was also revealed that on that day, Stephen had visited the spa when Ildiko wasn't yet there. For some reason, he left his car not in the parking lot but on a nearby street. On March 3, 2019, a month before the first anniversary of Ildiko Krajnyak's death, Stephen Bill was again arrested and held without bail. This time he was charged with malicious destruction of a building resulting in death. This new federal charge potentially carried a death sentence or life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. After another search of Stephen's home and vehicle, chemical residues were found to match those discovered at the crime scene. On March 13th, 3 more criminal offenses were added to his indictment: use of a weapon of mass destruction, use of a destructive device in relation to a violent crime, and possession of an unregistered destructive device. However, Stephen pleaded not guilty to all charges. His trial only began in June 2022. According to the prosecutor, Stephen couldn't accept the end of their relationship. and upon learning that Ildiko was already seeing other men, harbored resentment and wanted to make her pay for his humiliation. He had been planning his revenge for a month. With online access to Ildiko's schedule, he knew exactly which days she would be at the spa center. The defense team nearly dismantled all the prosecution's arguments, providing plausible explanations for both the chemical purchases and Stephen's presence at the spa. The jury wavered, believing that Stephen had the means and opportunity to commit such a crime, but that didn't necessarily mean he had done it. A retrial was ordered, and Stephen remained in jail until another trial began in June 2023. On July 19th, Stephen Bill was found guilty on all 4 counts. In January 2024, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for his role in Ildiko Krajnyak's death, plus additional years for related charges. This is how, using his knowledge in crafting deadly devices, Stephen Bill cowardly took the life of his former girlfriend and business partner, inflicted irreversible injuries on 2 other victims, and endangered the safety of many people in the area, including a kindergarten located across the street. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon. In April 2017, a video surfaced online showing a petite, delicate young woman with her arms bandaged up to the elbows, staring intently at the camera. She appeared quite youthful, yet the crime she was accused of shocked even the most seasoned detectives. Cassandra wrinkled her nose in disgust, extended her arm as far away from herself as possible, and simply poured the bleach onto the bathroom floor. Preparing the house for a large-scale party turned out to be no easy task. It needed to look presentable. To prevent her friend from being overwhelmed by the harsh odor, her boyfriend Johnny stepped in to help. Using an automatic gun with a dispenser tube, he sealed all the seams around the door frames with a white liquid resembling silicone adhesive. He meticulously sealed several interior doors in the house this way, including those to the bedroom, toilet, and bathroom. Even if someone wanted to enter, they wouldn't be able to do so. The sealant firmly held the blocked doors in place. 17-year-old Cassandra and 19-year-old Johnny crossed their fingers, hoping that none of the party guests would now be able to detect the scent of the 2 corpses upstairs. In the small town of Lawrenceville, Georgia, something peculiar was unfolding. Over the course of a week, a string of attacks occurred. 3 couples in 3 separate houses were victimized, with no signs of forced entry. On April 2nd, 2017, the first pair was discovered in their beds with their throats slashed. The entire residence was ransacked, as if the perpetrators were searching for something. 6 days later, on April 8th, 2017, the second couple was assaulted immediately upon entering their home. Their faces were doused with bear repellent spray. Then they were beaten with metal bats. The following day, a third couple was found lying on top of each other on the tiled bathroom floor. They were bleeding profusely, teetering between life and death. All 3 pairs were somehow connected, indicating these were not random attacks. As it turned out, the third couple had used a vehicle belonging to the second pair, and their intimate videos were found on the first couple's phone. So what was the link between these individuals? To uncover answers to these questions, law enforcement had to wait for medical professionals to complete their work, as the third couple had just been rushed to the emergency ward. If they didn't pull through, survive, the questions might remain unanswered. So now, all the police could do was wait for 19-year-old Johnny Ryder and 17-year-old Cassandra Bjorge to regain consciousness. Teenage love is so intense, it seems like the truest and only love in life. And typical hormones are to blame. Emotions run high, and young people barely notice other potential partners besides their love interest. If someone told 19-year-old Johnny that everything would pass with time, he simply wouldn't believe it, because he had found his other half, 17-year-old Cassandra. He adored every part of her and was certain this girl was perfect. Cassandra resembled a tiny ball of energy. At her small stature of just 5 feet 3 inches, she was a real fighter. A fighter in the literal sense. Cassandra had practiced Tang Soo Do for about 6 years. It's a Korean martial art. She knew how to break a concrete block with the edge of her hand, or how to defeat an opponent with a spinning kick. Cassandra also studied Shaolin, Kung Fu, Chinese Kung Fu, and even traveled internationally for tournaments in this sport. But then she had to give it all up, because her emotional state interfered with truly focusing on martial arts. She felt that her movement technique suffered as a result. Johnny saw Cassandra as the ideal girl, his soulmate, the other half of himself. This was a person he couldn't live without. And although they had only been dating for a few weeks, it felt to him like they had been together for a lifetime. It was love at first sight. The thing is, Johnny had divorced just 2 weeks ago, and only now, upon meeting Cassandra, realized that he had been searching for her all this time. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. Law enforcement stood before a white suburban house in the heart of a very quiet neighborhood. They hadn't entered yet, but already sensed something had occurred inside. The front door of this ordinary home wasn't just locked, it was completely sealed with sealant around its perimeter. Officers had to break a window to gain entry. The entire ground floor was in disarray. Cigarette butts were strewn across the living room with empty tubes of sealant lying on the floor nearby. Dirty dishes were everywhere, the sink piled high with plates covered in moldy food remnants, cans, some filthy rags, and empty medicine bottles. Next to the sink, directly on the floor, was a heap of fried rice. Some interior doors upstairs on the second floor were also blocked around their edges with silicone adhesive. Police had to force open each door to see what lay behind. In one of the home's bedrooms, officers discovered a man's body on the bed. Evidently, he had been attacked in his sleep, and viciously so. First beaten, then his throat cut. Bloody shoe prints remained on the sheets, indicating someone had stomped on this person so forcefully, essentially trampling him to inflict maximum injury. Above the headboard where the man lay, a pair of bloody handprints marked the wall. The attack was so brutal that blood spatter reached the walls, lampshade, and even the ceiling fan. Then officers proceeded to the bathroom, where they found another body on the floor. This was an elderly woman. She too had been beaten first, then had her throat slashed. Next to her on the floor lay an empty bleach bottle. The bathroom door was also sealed shut. It was a horrific crime scene. A completely ordinary residential house from the outside, but inside it resembled a monster's lair, with blood everywhere and the stench of death lingering. This was Cassandra's home. The bodies belonged to the married couple Wendy and Randall Bjorge, Cassandra's grandparents. They were both 63 years old and had been inseparable since high school. The day after the elderly couple's bodies were discovered, Cassandra's boyfriend Johnny Ryder left his mother chilling messages. His voice sounded very weak, barely audible. He whispered that he had gone mad, that he was evil, but loved his mom, then asked for forgiveness. The recording ended with him saying he was dying. This voice message was sent just before blood-stained Johnny Ryder and his girlfriend Cassandra Bjorge were found unconscious on the bathroom floor of a stranger's apartment in a residential complex. Several days after they were brought to the emergency room, Cassandra woke up in a hospital bed. The first people she saw were detectives. Police officers tried to learn from the girl what had happened to her, to which they received the answer that she had become very angry with herself and fell into depression. Cassandra felt like the whole world had crashed down on her, and she wanted to end it all at once. But the officers knew this girl wasn't so simple, so they tried to draw her into a dialogue and compelled her to tell what happened in Wendy and Randall Bjorge's house. Cassandra began telling a story of how her boyfriend Johnny coldly took the lives of her grandmother and grandfather. She tried to show how painful it was to remember all this, but during the story accidentally misspoke, confusing the pronoun he with we, thereby revealing she was more than just a witness to the crime. When Cassandra realized she hadn't managed to fool the police, her account became more realistic. Grandmother Wendy and grandfather Randall slept in separate rooms. That night, Cassandra came to her grandmother's bedroom around midnight. She and Johnny had waited for the house's occupants to fall asleep. When the elderly woman caught some noise from her husband's room, she tried to listen and understand its cause. It sounded like muffled thuds, as if someone was tenderizing meat for cooking. Wendy anxiously looked at her granddaughter, who had unexpectedly appeared in the bedroom, and wanted to go investigate the strange noise. But Cassandra knew exactly what was happening there. Her 19-year-old boyfriend Johnny was beating her grandfather. When the screams started, Cassandra realized there was no point in pretending anymore. She grabbed a crowbar and struck her grandmother on the back of the head. A week after the crime, Cassandra sat in the juvenile room, complaining to detectives about how tired she was of hospital food. Now, on the table in front of her, lay a bag of French fries, a milkshake, and hamburgers. When the police stepped out for a moment, the girl looked around, surveyed the room, and stared unblinkingly into the camera lens recording her. Her face was completely blank, showing no emotions, and it seemed she wanted to burn a hole through whoever was watching her through the lens. She looked like a teenager who had just woken up. Her arms were in casts up to the elbows, so Cassandra tried to grab French fries from the bag with her teeth. When the detectives returned to the room, the girl shared her version of why she decided to eliminate the only people who had ever cared for her. When criminals desperately need important information, they may resort to torture. But there's no greater torture than watching your loved one die. Cassandra dragged her grandmother's bloodied body into the adjacent room where Johnny and her grandfather were. Then she and her boyfriend taped their mouths shut, tied their hands, and demanded the safe code. To intimidate them, Johnny asked his girlfriend to run to the kitchen and bring 3 of the biggest knives. Cassandra knew there was a safe in her grandmother's closet where the pensioners kept cash. To show Wendy how serious they were, Johnny grabbed a butcher knife and began stabbing Randall in the stomach as she watched. Grandmother Wendy started begging her own granddaughter for them to stop. She would tell them everything they wanted, but through the layers of tape wrapped around her face, she wasn't easy to understand. As soon as the desired numbers were heard, Cassandra rushed to the closet to open the safe. The girl squealed with delight when she saw envelopes stuffed with money. Now she and Johnny were very rich. In the interrogation room, Cassandra told 2 investigators she was shocked by how much money was in her grandmother's safe. She grabbed a backpack and started stuffing it with envelopes of cash. The detectives exchanged glances when Cassandra said there was about $1,000. Then she smirked and added that her grandmother had let slip about the money herself when she asked what Cassandra would do if given $1,000. It's actually a decent sum, but hardly enough to run far after a double homicide. However, the love-struck couple didn't think of running. Instead, they spent the money for a whole week. But that was later, and for now, an excited Cassandra grabbed the backpack filled with cash and returned to the room where Johnny was watching over her barely alive grandparents. Her boyfriend saw that everything had worked out, and with a sharp knife movement, slit Randall's throat right in front of his wife. Then together they dragged Wendy to the bathroom, where Cassandra tried to send her grandmother to the afterlife using the same crowbar, striking her head. The woman went quiet, but the granddaughter thought she was pretending to be dead because a pulse could still be felt. Cassandra ran to Johnny and complained that Wendy was still alive. The boy then took the tool and delivered a single blow to the base of the elderly woman's neck, then, for good measure, slashed her throat with a knife. In the interrogation room, the girl demonstrated to the officers how she swung the crowbar with both hands. She showed no embarrassment or remorse for her actions. Cassandra behaved like a child, trying to impress the detectives with her strength and recklessness. When the teenagers were sure both spouses weren't breathing, they washed away all the blood, changed into clean clothes, and drove Randall's car to a local supermarket, where they bought food and brought it back to Cassandra's grandparents' house. For a whole week after the attack, the couple stayed in this house, sleeping, eating, ordering Chinese takeout, buying clothes. The $1,000 found in the safe was running out. Then Cassandra took out her grandmother's bank card, and the fun continued. The young people smoked weed, recorded intimate videos on grandmother's phone, and came up with another interesting entertainment, throwing a large party. In preparation, they spent every last cent in Wendy's bank account. The detectives asked the girl why they spent Wendy's money but didn't use Randall's card. Cassandra honestly replied that they simply couldn't find where grandfather had hidden his wallet. It turned out that the elderly man kept his mobile phone and wallet under his pillow. Apparently, the couple had already considered the possibility that their granddaughter might resort to theft. They probably just didn't imagine this exact turn of events. When the detectives told Cassandra where her grandfather kept his wallet, she smirked, rolled her eyes to the ceiling, and laughing, said he was damn clever. The police were also interested in one find in the car trunk. When Cassandra and Johnny were arrested, a whole gallon milk jug was found in the car. Now the officers wanted to find out why they needed it. Anyone who has experienced the effects of pepper spray knows the pain and suffering caused by a stream of this substance, even though it's designed only to stop an attacking person or dog. There's also a bear spray analog to pepper spray. Its concentration is several times higher, as bears are large and powerful animals. Imagine the devastating effect on a person if sprayed with this. It inflicts such intense, such exhausting pain that the victim is initially disoriented. The entire face burns, tears stream from the eyes, and the throat and nose feel as if seared by fire. Severe coughing begins. It seems the person might cough up their insides. This effect lasts from 24 hours to several days. Melissa and her boyfriend were college students, so after long days of classes, they seized any chance to be together. That evening on April 8th, they grabbed takeout food and headed to Melissa's home. They hadn't decided what to do when they pulled into the driveway in a quiet neighborhood, opened the front door, and went straight to Melissa's room. When they switched on the bedroom light, they saw the chaos that reigned there. Everything was overturned, items thrown on the floor, bedding and pillows tossed off the bed, clothes pulled from closets. It looked as if someone strong had flipped the room upside down and then shaken it. The room's owner was dialing 911 when she suddenly turned at a sound and saw an orange mist in the hallway. Not yet understanding what happened, she felt burning on her skin, then itching in her eyes, after which her whole body convulsed, her skin flared as if on fire, and tears flowed from her eyes. Melissa and her boyfriend squinted in pain, coughed, and both began to choke. Through the orange haze, Melissa saw a girl who seemed familiar, but at that moment she couldn't recall where she'd seen her, as all thoughts in her head jumbled. Meanwhile, the stranger approached, and through tears and fog, Melissa saw a baseball bat in her hand, which a second later came down on her back with full force. The next blow hit her head, and the student felt she could sense her blood pulsing as it spilled onto the floor. Lying on the floor in the orange mist, Melissa saw that her boyfriend was also under attack. She tried to wrench the bat from the stranger's hands and succeeded. She tossed the weapon to her boyfriend, but a second attacker tried to intercept the bat, and a fight broke out among the four young people. Melissa was kicked in the stomach several times, but she managed to grab the girl's hair and rip out a clump. Throughout this time, the assailants continued periodically spraying bear repellent, and since the spray shot in a directed stream, most of it hit the students. The struggle continued, with the attackers having the advantage. It's unclear how it would have ended if Melissa's mom hadn't opened the front door and entered at some point. The perpetrators managed to escape through the back door, while the student required 7 stitches and staples to close a huge gash on her head. Both were bruised from baseball bat strikes, and her boyfriend also had a broken tooth. Most troubling of all was that Melissa didn't even recognize her brother Johnny and his girlfriend Cassandra, whom she'd only met once before. Now, on top of everything else, the two had stolen Melissa's car, leaving behind Grandpa Randall's vehicle they'd arrived in earlier parked in the backyard. The plan had failed. Initially, Johnny Ryder and his girlfriend had intended to hide in the house and wait for his family members to return home one by one. The couple planned to dispatch them individually. They hadn't anticipated that Johnny's sister Melissa would come home with her boyfriend. Additionally, during the attack, Cassandra dropped the keys to Grandpa's car. They had to leave in the sister's car. Moreover, the bear repellent spray hung in the air like an orange fog. When the struggle for control of the bat began, both Johnny and Cassandra inhaled a lot of the substance. They stopped at a store and bought a whole gallon of milk to try washing the remnants of the burning spray off their skin. When police arrived at Melissa's house to take statements about the attack, they became interested in the car the criminals had arrived in. After checking the plates, officers learned the vehicle belonged to Randall Bjorge. Interestingly, a week earlier, they had received a request to check on this man's house. On April 2, 2017, Wendy's relatives called the police station, asking them to check the house where the woman lived with her husband and granddaughter, stating that 63-year-old Wendy wasn't answering phone calls, but was sending them text messages, something she had never done before. The relatives suspected someone else had taken control of her phone and was impersonating her. Police officers drove to the Bjorge couple's house, knocked on the door, and, receiving no answer, considered their duty fulfilled. Law enforcement had no compelling reason to break down doors and enter the home, so they assumed the couple had simply left. However, they now had cause to visit this house again, as someone else was using Randall's car. In the interrogation room, Cassandra explained their plan with John to 2 detectives. First, they wanted to eliminate her grandparents, which they easily accomplished. Next on the list was Johnny's family, because they didn't approve of the young man's choice. They disliked Cassandra, though they'd only seen her once. As the plan for Johnny's family failed, the criminal lovers stayed in town for a couple more days. They needed to prepare for their escape and gather some money. Investigators asked Cassandra why she was displeased with her grandparents, who had been caring for her all this time. The girl said they kicked her out because she stayed out late with friends and returned home after curfew. Supposedly, her grandmother threatened to send her back to her mother's house, so Cassandra decided to leave on her own. She even lived in her boyfriend's car for a while. The girl had thoughts of eliminating her mother and stepfather later, but Johnny said they didn't have time for that. Since the teenagers didn't know what weapons might be in Cassandra's mother's house, they decided not to risk going there. In reality, Grandma Wendy wanted to protect Cassandra at all costs from what the girl had endured in her mother's home. About a year and a half before all these events, Cassandra's grandparents filed for emergency custody of their granddaughter. According to witness accounts, Cassandra was potentially subjected to abuse by her stepfather, and her mother allegedly did nothing about it. A neighbor told Wendy that her daughter's new husband was harassing the girl. Because of this, Cassandra constantly ran away from home, and the police declared her missing several times. The grandparents couldn't leave their granddaughter in such conditions and obtained custody. The stepdaughter even had to obtain a restraining order against her stepfather because he started stalking her at school and waiting for her after classes. However, it's strange that having incredibly tense, painful relationships with her mother and stepfather, Cassandra decided to carry out retribution not against them, but against the people who essentially pulled her from the clutches of a monster who wanted to take advantage of the young girl. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video, it's really important. Police noted that in Wendy and Randall's house, the entire living room was filled with photos of Cassandra. The grandparents clearly loved their granddaughter and wanted to shield her from various troubles, but Cassandra felt they had lived long enough. While recounting her crime to detectives, the girl showed no emotional distress. She was calm, composed, and continued discussing her plans with Johnny. After leaving home, Cassandra and her boyfriend slept, ate, and lived in his car. During the day, they drove from place to place, sometimes meeting friends. Once, sitting in a park, Johnny turned to Cassandra and suggested they run away somewhere far together. The girl agreed, but before executing their plan, they decided to completely eliminate their families. According to Bjorge, the situation with her grandparents started to strain her. As she put it, she'd basically had enough. Their relationship had recently become so bad that she broke Randall's ribs and was now on probation for physically assaulting her relatives. Unsurprisingly, her grandparents began to be wary of their granddaughter. Cassandra complained to police that Wendy's gaze no longer held the love it once did. She stopped taking interest in her affairs, only lecturing about behavior. Moreover, neither grandmother nor grandfather liked Cassandra's new boyfriend, Johnny Ryder. Johnny's family also disliked his new girlfriend, so they all had to die for the couple to start a life somewhere else. They wanted to move to Pensacola, Florida, about 5.5 hours drive from Atlanta, Georgia. This isn't a distance that would allow them to hide after the mass slaughter they planned to carry out. But Cassandra and Johnny just wanted to escape reality. That's how the girl explained their choice of future residence. So, the plan was set to eliminate anyone who would interfere with their relationship. Both families disapproved of their union, and for this, they would have to die. First, Cassandra's grandparents, then Johnny's entire family, his mom and 2 sisters, just 5 people in total. At that point, they had been dating for only 2 months and felt like characters in a love story, the 2 of them against the whole world. When the first part of the plan was executed, Cassandra and Johnny, after living for a week in the house with dead bodies, decided to throw a party. They invited many people. Before their arrival, the teenagers decided to mask the unpleasant odor that had permeated the entire second floor and was beginning to seep into the first. Cassandra sprayed chlorine bleach in the bedroom where grandfather Randall lay and in the bathroom where grandmother Wendy's body rested. She poured the liquid directly on their bodies to hide the smell of decomposition. Johnny took a foam spray gun they found in the garage and sealed the perimeter of the second-floor doors. He used several canisters for this. Cassandra's best friends received a Snapchat message from her inviting them to the party. The girl wrote that her grandparents had gone to Florida for a few days and left her $1,000. Many friends doubted what was written in the message. They knew the Bjorges never traveled further than the store. Why would they suddenly leave their granddaughter alone and with a lot of money? Ironically, none of Cassandra's friends took up her invitation. Only 2 people who supplied them with weed came. When these guests inquired about the terrible stench in the house, Cassandra and Johnny blamed it on clogged plumbing. None of the party attendees could even imagine that the dead homeowners had been lying behind closed doors on the second floor for a week. After the failed attack on Johnny's sister Melissa and her boyfriend, the teenagers went on the run. They understood they couldn't return to the grandparents' house. The cops would instantly trace the address set in Randall's car and show up there. They urgently needed to find some other refuge. Jason was friends with Johnny during middle school, but after graduation, their paths diverged and the boys grew apart. Jason stayed with his old group, while Johnny started using illegal substances and hanging out with a different crowd. The guys didn't fight. Their interests just changed, and nothing remained of what had connected them in school. When Johnny and a girl named Cassandra unexpectedly appeared at Jason's apartment door, his former classmate was very surprised. They hadn't seen or spoken to each other for several months. Johnny was shirtless, his eyes bloodshot, and red spots spread across his face and body. His former friend asked Jason to let them in so he could clean up. He explained his appearance by saying he'd had another argument with his mom and she sprayed him with pepper spray. Johnny assured him that his former friend's apartment was the first place that came to mind. Jason allowed Johnny and his girlfriend Cassandra to enter, and then they stayed overnight. The guys felt as if they had all returned to middle school. In the morning, Johnny talked with the girl. While she prepared breakfast, they all drank coffee on the balcony, joked, and laughed. Everything was great until Jason and his guests heard a loud voice outside. Jason looked out the window and saw a strange scene. A police officer leaned out of a van parked near the house and repeated his demand through a megaphone for Johnny Ryder to come out with his hands up. It was Sunday morning, 10 o'clock on the clock. Jason came to his senses when he saw red dots from laser sights on his body and the walls. His first thought was to get his sister and mom out of there. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew for sure they needed to leave as soon as possible. Out of the corner of his eye, Jason saw Johnny grab a knife from the kitchen and head straight for him and his family. The guy's heart froze in horror, but his former classmate didn't use the weapon. He leaned in and hugged Jason, then thanked him for everything, apologized, and allowed them to leave their own apartment unhindered. As soon as Jason and his family were outside, they were surrounded by police who explained that his childhood best friend, Johnny Ryder, had tried to take the life of his sister and her boyfriend. And before that, together with Cassandra Bjorge, he had sent her grandmother and grandfather to the other world. Now that Jason and his mom and sister had left, Johnny and Cassandra were trapped inside someone else's apartment. They had no choice left. If they came out, they would be arrested. And by locking themselves inside, they were only delaying their arrest. When the Special Operations Unit burst into the room, they found the teenagers embracing on the tiled bathroom floor. Pools of blood slowly spread around them. The pair had attempted to harm themselves with a kitchen knife, aiming to leave this world together. Johnny clutched a mobile phone. He had sent his final voice message to his mother, asking for forgiveness. The adolescents were rushed to the hospital. Many likened Cassandra and Johnny to Romeo and Juliet. Supposedly, both families opposed their romance, leading to their decision to die. However, Cassandra later told investigators that when planning these mass crimes, they felt more like Bonnie and Clyde than Romeo and Juliet. Although Cassandra had never even seen that film. The video of Cassandra Bjorge's interrogation went viral due to her absurd behavior after coldly taking the lives of those closest to her. The girl admitted to impersonating her grandmother, sending text messages from her number to relatives to avoid suspicion. She also revealed quitting martial arts because her emotions began to overpower her reason at some point in life. She could no longer control her aggression, even though Kung Fu and Taekwondo require precise management of one's feelings and emotions. Her head was clouded by resentment towards the world, anger, and depression. Cassandra was imploding. She couldn't cope with this state. When striking her own grandmother's head with a crowbar, she felt a surge of energy. During interrogations, both Johnny and Cassandra were very concerned about each other. The boy confessed to officers that he couldn't live without Cassandra, that he had never felt this way about any other girl he'd dated, even his wife. Although they had known each other for a couple of weeks, he felt like he had known her his entire life. And Cassandra likewise constantly asked about Johnny's well-being. However, when it came to the trial, no trace of their love remained. The media could no longer call the two defendants Romeo and Juliet, or even Bonnie and Clyde, as they now argued and blamed each other. In the end, they both pleaded guilty to the slaughter of spouses Wendy and Randall Bjorge and the aggravated assault on Melissa Ryder and her boyfriend. Johnny Ryder and Cassandra Bjorge received 2 life sentences plus 21 years. They will both be eligible for parole after 60 years. One of the biggest debates in the courtroom was whether they could have committed these crimes without influencing each other. Most of the public believes they couldn't have. In their opinion, Cassandra was the driving force. Police were called to the grandparents' house where Cassandra lived 31 times between October 2015 and March 2017 due to reports of running away, domestic disputes, and suspicions of substance abuse. Acquaintances described Cassandra as a truly selfish individual. She was always one of those who cared about no one but herself. If someone tried to oppose her, she engaged in brutal fights, regardless of who was in front of her. Many netizens also believed that Cassandra wasn't in love with Johnny. The girl simply used him to carry out her own plan. She enjoyed controlling someone hopelessly in love with her and ready for anything, even crimes. Conversely, people said Johnny didn't seem like someone who would commit crimes on his own. It's possible that his beloved girlfriend told him false stories about how her grandparents mistreated her. Johnny just wanted to protect his girlfriend. His intellectual development wasn't at its peak due to constant use of controlled substances, so it wasn't difficult to deceive an infatuated young man without strong moral principles. In his closing statement at the trial, Johnny said he felt like a terrible person, the worst person on the planet. He apologized to the Bjorge family for his actions. Cassandra, however, didn't say a word. During a press conference, Cassandra's mother, Amanda Sterling, said that although her daughter had a fair share of behavioral problems, she never thought it would lead to something serious. The woman was most surprised when she learned she was on the list of potential victims. Other close relatives of the deceased Randall and Wendy Bjorge shared that they felt devastated. The grandparents were so devoted to their granddaughter that they did everything to raise her as a good person. This devotion makes Cassandra's betrayal even more destructive, utterly devoid of humanity and morality. The relatives couldn't imagine what Wendy felt when she witnessed the person she had spent her entire life with, her beloved Randall since school days, being killed before her eyes. And this wasn't done by some random criminal, but by their beloved granddaughter Cassandra, the one they had protected so much, the one they were proud of and had given their hearts to. Most likely, Wendy's soul died a little earlier than her heart stopped beating. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon. A 16-year-old boy was heading home after hanging out with his pals. His entire family was waiting for him there. His father, stepmother, and 2 little sisters, whom he adored immensely, were all at home. When Mark entered the house, he immediately realized something terrible had occurred. The whole family, including the 2 young girls, had been brutally slaughtered. The entire house was filled with blood. This incident became the most gruesome crime in Torsby's history. Dedra Lynn Mims was born on July 23, 1967, to Kendall and Elizabeth. Dedra had an older sister, Kendra, and a younger sister, Tedra. Not only were the girls' names distinctive, but they themselves were unique as well. Dedra and her sisters were born and raised in a small town called Clanton, Alabama, which at that time had a population of only 6,000 people. Clanton is situated halfway between Alabama's 2 largest cities, Montgomery and Birmingham. This made it an ideal location for those involved in business and manufacturing. Clanton is renowned for its annual peach harvests. Even the water tower there is painted to resemble a giant peach. While still attending high school, Dedra met her first love, Tommy Lee Hunt. Both young people came from large families and were themselves oriented towards starting a family. Right after finishing school, Tommy proposed to Dedra. Soon after, the couple wed and moved into their own home in Thorsby. At the age of 21, Dedra gave birth to a girl named Chelsea Marie Hunt. And just 6 months after Chelsea's birth, another little bundle of joy arrived, Chalisa Nichole Hunt. Being a mom is not only a joy but also a full-time job, and Dedra took pride in her work. She was an excellent mother, patient, sensitive, and very cheerful. At the same time, Dedra was excessively straightforward and had strong moral principles. The girls inherited their mother's curly hair and their father's eyes. Dedra loved dressing them in matching outfits, so they looked like twins with cute dimples on their cheeks and small button noses, as most children have. The only differences between them were a slight age gap and hair color. Chelsea was dark-haired, while Chalisa was fair-haired. Despite their outward similarities, their personalities differed greatly from each other. Chelsea grew up as a tomboy, played on the softball team in the junior league, spoke her mind freely, and always stood up for her younger sister. Chalisa, on the other hand, was a little princess, polite, graceful, loved dolls, dressing up in pretty dresses and styling her hair. Once at the zoo, they put a parrot on her shoulder, but the girl wasn't interested in the exotic bird. She was more concerned about keeping her curls neat. Every year, the girls would dress up for Halloween, celebrating holidays as a family. And in spring, Chelsea and Chalisa would help their aunt plant flowers in the backyard. When the plants bloomed, the girls would gather them on Mother's Day, take them to church, and give them to all the moms. The sisters loved each other, but of course, there were occasional small disputes. They always took their disagreements to heart, but by the end of the day, usually one of them would apologize, and they'd start giggling and running around the house happily again. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. In 1994, when Chelsea turned 5 and Chalisa was about 3.5, Tommy and Deidre separated. This often happens when people marry at such a young age. From high school to adulthood, many changes occurred in the couple's lives. Although they split up, they decided to do everything possible to ensure the divorce wouldn't affect the children. Tommy stayed with the girls in Thorsby so they wouldn't have to change schools or move elsewhere. The parents believed this stability was crucial for their future development. And Deidre, though heartbroken about parting with her little ones, tried her best to hide it. Mom and Dad made sure their daughters didn't feel any tension between the parents. Chelsea and Chalisa spent weekends with Deidre, while living with Tommy the rest of the time. The man quickly adapted to his new role, learning to cook, clean, and even braid hair. Tommy knew Deidre would always remain part of his family and respected her decision to keep the surname Hunt. The transition to separate lives was quite challenging, but the parents never showed this to their daughters. Deidre attempted to rebuild her personal life. She started meeting men and soon found a new partner. Randy Duke was almost 10 years older than Deidre. He was attentive to all her needs and even suggested she move into his house. Soon after, she introduced him to Chelsea and Chalisa and was amazed at how easily and quickly he got along with her children. Randy Gerald Duke was born in Chicago, Illinois. However, he spent his childhood in Alabama with his numerous siblings. After finishing school, he became a plumber, then married a woman named Tara Eccles. In 1980, the couple had a son, whom they named Mark Anthony Duke. Unfortunately, the couple's relationship didn't last long. At that time, Randy wasn't prepared to become a father, so the child remained in his mother's custody. Tara struggled to make ends meet. She lived in a dilapidated rural house with no toilet or running water, making it very difficult to provide for her son. Perhaps that's why, when the boy turned 10, he essentially reunited with his father. At 14, Mark moved in with Randy, who was then in his 30s. Randy took out a loan to buy a house in Pelham, a 30-minute drive from Thorsby. It was a beautiful 2-story home with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a huge backyard, fireplace, living room, and spacious kitchen, the perfect family home. To keep up with the mortgage payments, Randy worked 2 jobs. He was a plumber at one company and an employee of the Alabama Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. For a while, the man was engaged to a woman named Donna Colla Francesco, a school teacher who cared for his son Mark. Because Randy worked so much, he couldn't devote much time to raising his son. Donna drove the boy to football practice, went shopping with him, and knew all his friends. So when Donna and Randy's 4-year relationship ended, it deeply affected Mark. The teenager felt as if he'd lost another mother. Randy knew how hard his son took the breakup with Donna, so he tried his best to become a better father to him. When Deidre, Chelsea, and Chalisa entered Mark and Randy's lives, the man saw it as a great opportunity to create a strong, close-knit family, finally providing stability for his son. Randy genuinely loved Deidre's daughters, and was always attentive to them as well as to his son Mark. Deidre moved in with Randy, and just a year later, he proposed to her, which she accepted. The whole family enthusiastically prepared for the upcoming celebration, choosing the venue, outfits, compiling guest lists and menus for the festive dinner. It was 1997. Randy was 39, Deidre 29, Mark had turned 16 and was in high school. Chelsea had entered second grade at nearly 8 years old, while Chalisa had recently celebrated her 6th birthday. Mark became an older brother to the girls, whom they simply adored. His friends said he cared for them so deeply that he was even willing to give his life for Chelsea and Chalisa. During winter break, the girls went on vacation with their father, Tommy, and his sister, Tara. They were allowed to eat cupcakes for breakfast, jump on the bed, stay up late, and watch movies. It was one of those magical vacations where you cherish every moment. They had no idea then that it would be their last holiday together. On Friday, March 21st, 1997, little Chalisa participated in her very first beauty pageant at Thorsby Elementary School. It was the weekend before Easter, so all the students were dressed in spring colors. Chalisa wore a white ruffled dress, white socks, and white shoes. Her fair hair was curled into tight ringlets, and a happy smile lit up her face. That day, she looked like an angel. Although Chalisa won a respectable second place, she enjoyed it so much that she told her parents she wanted to participate in the next contest. That evening, they returned to Tommy's, where Deidre helped her daughters change and pack for the weekend so they could spend a couple of days with her and Randy. The girls hugged and kissed their dad goodbye, and Deidre promised to bring them back Sunday evening. Everything was going as usual. It was just another fun weekend at Randy's in Pelham. Except everything did not go as planned. At 8:40 p.m. on Sunday, March 23, 1997, the evening Deidre was supposed to return the girls to Tommy's house, a call came into the 911 dispatch center. On the other end, an agitated male voice, on the verge of hysteria, reported that his entire family had been killed. The operator quickly dispatched a rapid response team to Randy and Deidre's house on Chandawood Drive. Upon arrival, they found a frantic teenager standing outside the building in the darkness. It was Mark Duke. He was the one who called the police and reported the tragedy at the family home. The rapid response team realized that if Mark's family was harmed, he might be in danger too. It was possible the perpetrators were still in the house. That's why they sent the young man with an officer to a juvenile center where he was placed in custody until all circumstances could be clarified. The police knew the teenager had experienced trauma and wanted to ensure Mark received qualified assistance. The team arriving at the scene immediately understood a crime had occurred in the house. They promptly cordoned off the perimeter with tape and called in investigators for serious crimes. Outside Randy Duke's house, 4 vehicles were parked: 2 sports pickups, Deidre's car, and Randy's work truck. The house itself had 3 levels, as it had a basement in addition to the first and second floors. Upon entering, detectives found complete disarray. Various items were scattered throughout the house. This is typical in robberies when criminals search for valuables and simply toss everything else out of closets. Right there on the living room floor near the fireplace, a man lay face down, surrounded by a pool of already congealed blood. It was obvious he had received multiple wounds to his head and back. Next to him lay a kitchen knife blade without a handle. Likely, such force was used that the handle broke during use. Judging by the brutality of the entire scene, whoever did this must have felt intense anger towards the deceased. This was most likely a personal vendetta, because in most cases, a knife is used by people in a state of extreme rage, that is, by someone who harbors strong feelings and emotions towards the victim. As the police continued their search, they were nearly brought to tears. They dreaded what scenes awaited them in the other rooms. In the living room, next to the sofa, stood a coffee table where children often drew. Now, 2 unfinished pencil drawings lay on the table, spattered with blood droplets. It was emotionally jarring to see the contrast between a happy child's fantasies and the grim reality. Detectives didn't want to think about what had happened or what else they might find in this house, because right there on the couch was even more blood, and worse, there lay knocked-out human teeth. From the living room to the hallway where the stairs were located, a blood trail led, and it didn't appear to be from the man lying by the fireplace. This meant someone else was hurt, and officers wondered if it was a criminal or other victims. Investigators went upstairs and found 3 bedrooms. 2 were at the front of the house, while the blood trail led down the hall to the main bedroom at the back. That room was also in disarray. Dresser drawers were pulled out, closets open, all clothes strewn across the floor. There was also an adjoining bathroom. The door leading to the bathroom consisted of 6 wooden panels, one of which had a hole punched through it. A large pool of blood had seeped under the doors into the bedroom. This house could be considered one of the bloodiest crime scenes local authorities had encountered. One detective tried to enter the bathroom, but the door was either locked or blocked by something. He peered through the hole made at doorknob level. Apparently, someone before them had also wanted to get in there. It turned out another body lay inside. It was a woman, presumably the lady of the house. Once the police managed to enter the bathroom, an incomprehensible reality unfolded before them. What they had feared seeing. In the back, behind the curtain, lay a little girl with fair curls. It was clear she was no longer alive, the cause being a cut on her neck. This was the most difficult task the officers had to undertake. Now they had to move on and check each room in this house. They first returned to the hallway and examined a bedroom clearly belonging to a teenage boy. Everything inside was ransacked, and symbols resembling local gang signs were carved into the drywall. Investigators didn't yet know what the strange abbreviation might mean, but first guesses emerged that all this carnage could have been orchestrated for some satanic ritual. The police had one more room to check. This was the final act. On the floor, face down, lay a small figure with long curly hair, only darker than the first girl's. The entire bedroom was splattered with dark red, on the walls, on the furniture, under the body on the floor, and even some on the ceiling. Judging by the position in which the schoolgirl was found, she had been dragged out from under the bed and killed. There were multiple torn wounds on the body, and nearby lay a blood-soaked black bandana, which was subsequently taken as evidence. This time, the detectives couldn't hold back their tears. The tiny hands showed signs of defensive wounds. The little one had fought with all her might in her last painful and agonizing minutes. She had struggled for her life. A young investigator, who had children of the same age at home, barely contained himself. He couldn't imagine what kind of monster could raise a hand against these little angels. The older detective knew that, no matter how difficult it was, they needed to maintain composure because they had to figure out who could have sent an entire family to the other side. Less than 30 minutes after the investigation began, a car pulled into the driveway. A man jumped out and ran to the front entrance. At that stage, the detectives couldn't be fully certain whose bodies were found in the house. They only knew from Mark Duke's 911 call, where he identified his father, Randy. So the police had no idea who this man rushing to enter the house was. When the stranger looked into the officer's eyes, they got the impression that this person definitely knew what had happened inside. He introduced himself as Tommy Hunt and said he was the father of 2 girls visiting the house. And then the detective realized he now had to deliver terrible news to a parent. The officer held Tommy by the shoulder and told him that everyone in this house had died. At that moment, Tommy broke down. It was such a strong display of emotion and grief that the detective couldn't determine whether the man was genuinely upset or playing a role. What were the chances that Tommy would appear at his ex-wife's house before the police notified relatives? How could he have known something had happened here? Tommy explained that he was the girl's primary guardian, and Deidre, his ex-wife, was supposed to bring Chelsea and Chalisa back several hours ago. When she didn't show up, didn't call back, and worse, ignored his calls, Tommy grew worried. It was already 9:30 p.m. and the girls should have been in bed, but they still weren't home. That's when he decided to drive over and find out the reason for such behavior. Parking at the house, he noticed the commotion everywhere and police cars. Tommy immediately knew something bad had happened. Tommy was taken to the station and questioned. He was the deceased Dedra's ex-husband and could provide valuable information to the authorities. Tommy had last seen his daughters and ex-wife after Friday's beauty pageant at the elementary school. The man admitted that, of course, his divorce from Dedra had been quite difficult. They had been in love since high school, but now emotions had settled. He saw that both the children and their mother were happy with Randy, so their relationship had evolved into a friendly one. According to Tommy, Dedra was an excellent mother, and he didn't know anyone who would want to harm her or the children. As it initially appeared that Tommy had no connection to the crime, he was released. The detectives then decided to talk to Mark Duke, the son of the deceased Randy Duke. Investigators wanted to understand what he saw when he entered his home that evening. The young man, who was temporarily in the juvenile center, explained that he had spent the weekend at his friend's house, 16-year-old Mike Ellison, on his parents' farm. Mike's father needed help to dismantle an old, dilapidated barn, so he called his son's friends. When the weekend ended, Mark was driven home as he had to go to school the next morning. He thought it would be a typical Sunday evening. The girls would be home until Dedra drove them back to Tommy's house, and the family would watch TV together in the living room. But when the teenagers arrived at the house, no lights were on inside. The front door was closed, and Mark opened it with his key. Entering, the boy turned on the light in the hall, and when he turned towards the living room, he saw the figure of a man lying near the fireplace. Mark called out to his father, but Randy didn't respond. Then the boy saw a blood trail leading from the living room to the second-floor stairs. Mark was afraid to go further. He grabbed the cordless phone, ran out to the yard, and dialed 911. The forensic examination determined that Randy, Chelsea, and Chalisa had received fatal stab wounds, while Dedra had been shot. Randy, the homeowner, had also been shot several times. At first, detectives wondered if one of the adult family members could have carried out the massacre and then taken their own life. But after searching the house, they found no firearms. Their initial theory didn't explain the knocked-out teeth on the couch and the hole punched in the bathroom door. More than a dozen shell casings of .32 and .45 caliber were found at the crime scene. This meant two types of firearms were used, so there could have been two perpetrators. The knife blade found in the living room matched other knives in the kitchen set. This meant the assailants only brought guns with them. The autopsy of the deceased showed that rigor mortis had set in long ago. Most likely, all victims had been dead for more than 36 hours, long before the 911 call was made. Therefore, the detectives concluded that this crime was unlikely to be related to a religious holiday. The bodies were found on Palm Sunday, but the crime had been committed much earlier. Nevertheless, they were still puzzled by the inscriptions on the wall in Mark's room. Now that the police had more details about the timeline of events, they returned to speak with Mark, hoping he could provide them with some additional information or recall what his family was doing before the attack. The young man told investigators he didn't know what was happening at home, as he had been at Mike's place all weekend. On Saturday evening, he and his friends went to the movie theater to watch Scream. He even still had his ticket stub. Mark hadn't been home since Friday. The two friends who had given him a ride that evening came to the police station themselves to give statements. They were 19-year-old Brandon Samry and 17-year-old David Collins. The guys confirmed everything Mark had previously said. The father of one of the teenagers also verified that they had spent the whole weekend taking apart a shed on his farm. It appeared that the last person to have seen the children and Dedra was Tommy Hunt, her ex-husband. Randy and Dedra's families had already been notified about the tragedy involving their loved ones, so all the relatives had gathered at the police station waiting for answers. Neighbors crowded around the house where the tragedy occurred. They wanted to know what was going on because none of them had heard any disturbances at Randy's house. Throughout the weekend, everything had been quiet and calm. Pelham was considered a peaceful town. Every resident believed that their home's walls guaranteed complete safety. But now, people were afraid to go out to their backyards in the evening because no one knew where the killers who had harmed Chelsea and Chalisa were hiding. On Monday, the day after the entire family's demise, the whole Thorsby school district was shocked by the horrific news. The girls' young friends encountered death for the first time, and for them, it was a real trauma. The children couldn't understand how this could have happened. Just last week, they were having fun and playing together, and now Chelsea and Chalisa were gone. It's incredibly difficult to explain to a child that they will never see their friend again. The school arranged for a counseling psychologist to be available for elementary students in case anyone needed support. News of the brutal slaying spread throughout the community and beyond. Media vans and reporters flocked to Pelham. All of this increased pressure on the police, and detectives rushed to solve the crime while the trail was still fresh. The autopsy findings were staggering. The victims not only endured physical pain, but were likely terrified. Even officers who arrived first at the scene couldn't shake the horrific images from their minds for years afterward. During the investigation, a theory emerged that the entire family might have been targeted due to Randy's work. He wasn't just a plumber, but also served on Alabama's Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. Randy was an undercover agent in the Bureau of Illegal Drug Distribution Control. The 1990s saw an opioid epidemic in the USA. Prescription drugs were not only given to patients, but also sold on the side. Randy Duke would get acquainted with gang members, learn how they obtained controlled substances, and pass this information to the police. The issue was that afterward, he had to testify in court using his real name. Randy indeed had enemies harboring grudges for ruining their lives. However, a thorough examination of Randy's undercover work revealed no significant connections to released criminals. Detectives reviewed Randy's bank records, but his accounts were in order. He hadn't made purchases in questionable places, withdrawn large sums, or owed anyone money in recent years. Time was running out, and the perpetrator was still at large. The state governor offered a $20,000 reward, and tips poured in. Many members of the public pointed fingers at the family's only survivor, 16-year-old Mark Duke. People who knew Mark from middle school described him as a troubled teen. When younger, he was a very quiet, introverted boy. Schoolwork was extremely challenging for him. This wasn't surprising, given the conditions in which the child grew up. As Mark got older, behavioral problems compounded his poor academic performance. He acted out so much that Randy, who hadn't been involved in his upbringing during childhood, decided to send the boy to a boot camp for troubled teens. He genuinely wanted to help his son, but after returning, Mark's behavior worsened. It seemed the young man was constantly angry at the world. No one could pinpoint the exact cause of such conduct, and everyone chalked it up to teenage angst. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video, it's really important. Investigators discovered that Mark and his group of friends called themselves a gang. It wasn't a gang in the traditional sense, they were more like wannabes. The group included about 10 young people, among them 4 guys: Mark Duke, Brandon Samra, Mike Ellison, and David Collins. These were the boys Mark had spent the weekend with and gone to the movies. To understand the situation, detectives had to thoroughly examine each of the guys. They were typical teenagers. Some had dropped out of school and caused trouble for local residents with their behavior. But they had no serious criminal records beyond that. Plus, Mark seemed to have no motive for attacking his family. Then detectives received another tip. A man called and said he'd heard information, albeit through several sources, that a young man had confessed to his girlfriend about killing his entire family. This girl's name was Sarah Woodruff. She was only 14 years old and was dating none other than Mark Duke. Detectives contacted Sarah, and on Tuesday morning, the 25th, she came to the station with her mother. The girl said she'd noticed cuts on Mark's hands and asked where he got them. Her boyfriend suddenly started talking about being at his father's house with his friends on Saturday evening. Sarah then shared details that only someone present at the crime scene could have known. She didn't actually believe Mark, thinking he was just trying to impress her and had made up this wild story. Looking back, detectives remembered something odd about Mark's 911 call. Initially, the boy told the dispatcher that his whole family was dead, but later during questioning, he said he'd only seen Randy lying by the fireplace and a bloody trail leading upstairs. So how could he have known everyone else was dead too? When asked about this, he explained that he'd noticed Dedra's car in the driveway, but hadn't seen the woman herself. However, the bloody trail clearly indicated his entire family had been attacked. It was strange that he hadn't at least checked on the girls, but he couldn't be blamed for that, unless, of course, he was responsible. Though police began to suspect Mark, they lacked concrete evidence to charge him. That's when Sarah, his 14-year-old girlfriend, came to their aid. Despite her fear, the girl agreed to wear a recording device under her clothes and managed to capture a conversation among the friends discussing the horrific events of that night. Mike Ellison and Brandon Samra admitted involvement in the crime, but didn't provide details. Now the police had real cause to question them separately. It's possible the teenagers were just trying to appear tough and fabricating the whole horror. First, Mike Ellison was brought to the interrogation room. The conversation lasted several hours. Initially, he denied involvement, but then gave in and presented his version of events. According to Mike, Mark Duke bore full responsibility for the family's slaughter. He claimed Mark had taken the lives of his father, Randy, Deidre, Chelsea, and Chalisa. The other 3 teenagers had merely given him a ride to the family home. Brandon went inside with Mark, while Mike himself and David Collins waited in the car. David corroborated Mike's statement. All that remained was to question Brandon Samra to understand what really happened on that fateful evening. At first, the young man adamantly denied his participation in the crime, but when they played the recording of the conversation where he boasted about his brutality, Brandon gave in and told them everything. Mark Duke had been hanging out with friends for weeks, constantly talking about how angry he was at his father for being too strict. The young man blamed Randy for spending his childhood years with his mother in deprivation, while his father enjoyed a good life. The second grievance was about the boot camp for troubled teens where he was sent. Mark felt his father had simply gotten rid of him this way. Third, Randy wouldn't give him the keys to his pickup truck. On Friday evening, the teenager wanted to drive his father's car to a party. Any reasonable adult would understand why the man acted as he did. After all, Mark was only 16 and had repeatedly demonstrated irresponsibility. But for Mark himself, this was the last straw. They even had a physical fight over it. The teenager decided that very evening Randy would say goodbye to life. When Brandon asked Mark what he planned to do with Dedra, Chelsea, and Chalisa, who would surely be in the house, he replied that no witnesses could be left. At first, his friends thought Duke was joking and wouldn't do anything. Everyone knew Mark cared for these little girls and loved them like sisters. But it turned out this wasn't actually the case. Before the attack, Mike Ellison got 2 pistols, .45 and .32 caliber. Then they carefully wiped the weapons and bullets with a black bandana to remove possible DNA traces or fingerprints. 2 guys stayed in the car while Mark and Brandon went to Randy's house, where 2 adults and 2 children were at the time. Randy and Dedra were watching TV on the couch, while Chelsea and Chalisa were drawing with pencils at the coffee table. Mark approached his father, pointing the gun right at his face. Randy tried to calm his son, saying all disagreements could be resolved peacefully. The man apparently didn't even consider the possibility that the teenager might shoot. Mark said he was tired of Randy and his instructions, then fired a bullet into his father's cheek. In an attempt to defend himself, Randy grabbed what was at hand. It was a soft toy cat. He threw it at Mark, but the latter wasn't about to back down. However, he missed the second time. Brandon didn't mention that he also shot at Randy, but the autopsy showed the man was killed by bullets of different calibers. When the homeowner fell, Mark approached and fired his third and final shot at point-blank range. Deidre, still on the couch, panicked. She knew she needed to get her daughters away quickly, but couldn't because Brandon shot her. The teen aimed for her head, but the bullet hit her jaw, knocked out several teeth, and threw her back on the couch without knocking her unconscious. The mother's priority was saving her girls. She grabbed Chalisa and ran upstairs to hide. Chelsea managed to dash ahead. Deidre ran, bleeding, while Brandon stopped her with shots, one of which hit its mark. The bullet went through her arm and into her chest, but Deidre kept running. The mother was determined to protect her children. Older Chelsea hid under a bed in one of the upstairs bedrooms, while Deidre and Chalisa barricaded themselves in the master bedroom's bathroom. To ensure his father's death, Mark struck him so forcefully that the handle broke. He dropped the blade near the body and went upstairs. Meanwhile, Brandon tried to break down the bathroom door where Deidre and Chalisa were hiding. Mark helped him make a hole in the panel. He then reached in, opened the door, and turned the handle. The woman and daughter were sitting on the floor, huddled together. Mark put Chalisa in the shower and closed the curtain so she wouldn't see what he was about to do. Deidre bowed her head, begging the teens to let her and the girls go. But Mark heartlessly aimed at her forehead and said she was as bad as Randy. She was always telling him what to do. The boy mercilessly pulled the trigger. This was the last bullet, so they had to continue using butcher knives. Brandon hesitated, but Mark insisted they couldn't leave witnesses. The older brother, as the girls considered him, calmed Chalisa, saying it would hurt only for a moment, and put the knife to her neck. Then the teens searched the rooms for Chelsea and finally found her hiding under the bed. The little girl resisted with all her might and even managed to injure Brandon and Mark during the struggle, but the odds were against her. While Mark held Chelsea with both hands, Brandon used his knife. This crime was so evil and senseless that even Brandon himself couldn't explain why he blindly followed Mark's orders. During his account, the teenager showed no emotion, no remorse or regret. The boys went downstairs, and Mark reached into his dead father's pocket and stole his wallet. Then they ran to the nearest lake, washed their hands, cleaned their clothes as best they could, and threw the knives into a storm drain. To create an alibi, Brandon and Mark went with Mike and David to a movie theater about 15 minutes away. They bought tickets for the horror film Scream, but only watched the last half hour, though they kept the stubs proving the movie started at 10 p.m. On Saturday, they played pool and ate at a cafe as if nothing had happened. On Sunday morning, Mark returned to the crime scene, having a brilliant idea to make it look like a gang member had tried to get revenge on Randy. He carved rival gang signs on the bedroom wall, as if they were targeting him. Then Mark wiped fingerprints everywhere he thought they might be. He scattered belongings to simulate a robbery. Then he hung out with friends for the rest of the day, hoping someone else would discover the bodies and call the police. However, this didn't happen. Mark had to show up at home on Sunday anyway to avoid suspicion. Here he made a mistake, telling the dispatcher that his whole family was dead. The butcher knives were found in the storm drain. They still had bloodstains and hair on them. Brandon Samra and Mark Duke were charged with capital murder. They were arrested on Wednesday, March 26th. The two other teenagers, Mike and David, were charged with aiding and abetting premeditated murder. Each received a $1 million bail. The police worked tirelessly for 3 days and were able to solve the case. Tommy Hunt's life changed forever. He lost 2 daughters and a woman he once loved deeply. He had to move out of the house with so many memories of the deceased because he couldn't stay there anymore. All 4 boys pleaded not guilty and applied for juvenile offender status, which would have reduced their sentences to just 3 years. Fortunately, they were denied. The state prosecutor sought the death penalty for Brandon and Mark. Both young men were placed in solitary confinement for their own safety, as they received threats from other inmates for their actions against Chelsea and Chalisa. The trial of Brandon took place in March 1998. The Hunt family attended the trial wearing pink ribbons in memory of the deceased girls. By unanimous jury decision, Brandon Samra was sentenced to death, despite efforts by his lawyers. In March 1999, Mark Ellison and David Collins pleaded guilty and received lighter sentences, getting only 16 years each. At Mark Duke's trial, Brandon, already sentenced to death, testified as a witness. The entire audience cried when he recounted the events of that evening. Only Mark showed no reaction, as he was shocked by his friend's participation in this process. Evidence supporting Brandon's words was also presented by the prosecution, so his account was largely accurate. No matter how hard Mark's lawyers tried to defend their client, they failed. Mark Anthony Duke was also initially sentenced to death, but later his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole in accordance with a U.S. Supreme Court decision prohibiting the execution of criminals who committed their crimes as minors. Mark was only 16 when he decided to punish his family. His friend Michael Brandon Samra was 19 when the boys took the lives of innocent people, and he was not covered by the new law. On May 15, 2019, he was executed by lethal injection. Thorsby School built a gym in memory of their students, giving children the opportunity to laugh, joke, play, and exercise. This was the best way to honor Chalisa and Chelsea, as well as their loving mother Dedra and their second father Randy, because as cliché as it may sound, only one thing is stronger than evil, and that is love. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon.